What happens when the family disgrace walks into the most powerful ballroom in the nation and refuses to leave? Tonight, Elara Whitcomb will do something unforgivable. Not to her family, not to society, but to the version of herself that learned to stay small, stay quiet, stay gone. In a world where perfection is currency and weakness is sin, she's been both burden and ghost. The scarred second daughter no one wants to claim. But when her flawless sister pushes too far on the night that matters most, something inside Elara doesn't just crack. It ignites. Stay until the end to see how one invisible girl destroys the rules that tried to erase her. Drop your city in the comments, and if this story grabs you by the throat, hit that like button. You're going to need to remember where you were when you heard this one. The scar started at Elara's left temple and carved a thin, deliberate line down to her jaw, a souvenir from the fever that nearly killed her at 14. The physician said she was lucky to survive. Her mother said she was lucky the scar wasn't worse. Her sister Vivian said nothing at all, which was somehow the cruelest response of the three. Tonight, standing in front of the mirror in her bedroom, Elara traced that line with her fingertip and tried to remember what her face looked like before. She couldn't. The fever had stolen more than just smooth skin. It had rewritten her place in the world. You're not seriously planning to go downstairs looking like that. Elara didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. Vivian stood in the doorway, a vision in midnight blue silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Her blonde hair was swept into an elaborate updo that had taken 2 maids 3 hours to perfect. Her skin glowed. Her eyes were cold. "I'm going to the ball," Elara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mother said I had to attend. Mother said you had to make an appearance, 5 minutes in the corner, then back upstairs before you embarrass us." Vivian stepped into the room, her gown whispering against the floor. "You do understand that tonight matters, don't you? Lord Ashford will be there, Duke Hale, half the peerage." "I know who'll be there." "Then you know that Father is negotiating contracts, that our family's standing depends on the impressions made tonight." Vivian picked up the simple strand of pearls Elara had laid out on her dresser. Their grandmother's, the only jewelry their mother had allowed her to wear. "This isn't about you getting to play dress-up, Elara. This is business. I'm not playing." "Aren't you?" Vivian's smile was a surgical instrument. "Look at yourself. That dress is 3 years out of fashion. Your hair, did you even try? And that face?" She trailed off, as if the scar was too tragic to name aloud. "People will talk. They'll ask Father why he brought his damaged daughter to the most important social event of the season. Do you want to be the reason our family becomes a joke?" Elara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the dresser. "I'm not damaged." "No?" Vivian set the pearls down and met Elara's eyes in the mirror. "Then why does Mother keep you hidden? Why does Father introduce you as the younger Miss Whitcomb and change the subject as fast as possible? Why did Lord Pemberton laugh last month when someone suggested you as a match for his son?" Each question was a knife finding the space between ribs. Elara had heard variations of this speech her entire life, sometimes from Vivian, sometimes from their mother, sometimes from the cruel whispers at gatherings she wasn't supposed to overhear. The words changed, but the message never did. You are less. You are other. You are the thing we would erase if we could. "I'm going to the ball," Elara said again. Vivian sighed, the sound dripping with practiced disappointment. "Fine, but stay out of sight. Don't talk to anyone important. And for God's sake, don't draw attention to yourself." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Elara, if anyone asks you to dance, which they won't, say no. The last thing this family needs is you stumbling around a ballroom making a spectacle." The door clicked shut. Elara stood alone in the silence that followed, her reflection staring back at her like an accusation. The dress was out of fashion. Her maid had done her best with Elara's dark hair, but there was only so much that could be done without the expensive products and skilled hands Vivian commanded. And the scar, well, the scar was undeniable. Elara picked up her grandmother's pearls and fastened them around her neck with fingers that had finally stopped shaking. She'd been 10 years old when the fever came. It had swept through the city that winter, killing dozens and leaving hundreds more marked by its passage. Elara remembered very little of those weeks, fever dreams, the smell of medicine, her mother's face swimming in and out of focus above her bed. When she'd finally woken, weak and hollow, the first thing she'd seen was Vivian standing in the doorway of her room. "You look different," Vivian had said. She was 12 then, already beautiful, already learning how to weaponize that beauty. "You're not pretty anymore." Their mother had shushed her, but the damage was done. And in the years that followed, as Elara's scar settled into permanence and Vivian's beauty sharpened into something extraordinary, the difference between them became the organizing principle of their lives. Vivian was the daughter to display. Elara was the daughter to explain. Vivian attended every ball, every dinner, every social gathering that mattered. Elara attended the ones where her absence would be noted and was instructed to make herself forgettable. Vivian had suitors lining up to court her. Elara had sympathetic aunts suggesting she consider a quiet life helping with the family's charitable foundations. The message was clear. Vivian would marry well and elevate the family. Elara would stay small and try not to be a burden. Tonight was supposed to be Vivian's triumph. The Ashford Ball was the event of the season, a glittering showcase where the most powerful families in the nation gathered to see and be seen. Lord Ashford's estate was legendary, his guest list impenetrable. An invitation meant you mattered. A successful appearance could secure a family's position for years. And Vivian, radiant and ruthless, was ready to claim her place at the center of it all. Elara was supposed to be the footnote, the forgettable sister in the corner, the reminder that even perfect families had flaws. She looked at herself in the mirror one more time. The scar caught the lamplight. Her dress was simple but clean, the pale green fabric chosen to avoid drawing attention. Her hair was pinned back in a style that was neither fashionable nor offensive. Safe, like everything else about her presentation. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, invisible. But something had broken tonight when Vivian walked into her room with that smile. Something had cracked when her sister had looked at her and seen nothing but a problem to be managed. And standing here now, alone in her bedroom, with the sounds of the gathering party drifting up from downstairs, Elara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold kind. The kind that didn't shout or rage, but instead settled into her bones and said, "I'm done being erased." She didn't know what that meant yet. Didn't have a plan or a strategy or even a clear sense of what she was rebelling against. But she knew, with a certainty that felt like standing on solid ground after years of sinking, that she was going downstairs tonight. Not to hide in a corner, not to make herself small, to exist. Elara picked up her gloves, simple white cotton, not the silk Vivian wore, and pulled them on with deliberate care. Then she walked out of her room, down the hallway, and descended the grand staircase toward the sound of violins and laughter, and her sister's perfect, brittle world. The Ashford estate was a monument to power. Elara had never seen anything like it. Their carriage had rolled through gates that looked like they could withstand a siege, past gardens lit with hundreds of lanterns, and finally stopped at the entrance to a ballroom that seemed to exist in a different century, one where kings still ruled and common people knew their place. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with scenes of classical myth. The floor was polished marble that reflected the light like water. And everywhere, there were people who moved with the confidence of those who had never questioned their right to be exactly where they were. Elara's father had disappeared within minutes of their arrival, swallowed up by a group of older men smoking cigars near the terrace. Her mother had taken Vivian by the arm and sailed into the crowd like a warship, already scanning for targets. No one had told Elara where to go. She stood just inside the entrance, pressed against a column that supported one end of the musicians' gallery, and watched. This was a world she'd only ever seen from the edges. She'd attended smaller gatherings, of course, dinners and teas where the stakes were lower and her presence could be tolerated. But nothing like this. This was where reputations were built and destroyed, where alliances were formed over a dance and ended with a well-placed rumor, where people like Vivian thrived and people like Elara learned to disappear. "You're blocking the walkway." Elara jerked her attention to the woman who'd spoken, older, dripping in diamonds, her face a mask of practiced boredom. She wasn't looking at Elara, she was looking through her, the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that needed to be moved. "Sorry," Elara mumbled and stepped back. The woman swept past without acknowledgement, 3 other people followed in her wake. Younger women in gowns that probably cost more than Elara's entire wardrobe, laughing at something one of them had said. None of them looked at her. This was what Vivian meant by staying out of sight. Don't be an obstacle. Don't draw attention. Don't exist in any way that might interfere with the people who actually mattered. Elara moved along the wall, careful to avoid the main flow of traffic, and found a spot near one of the tall windows that overlooked the garden. From here she could see most of the ballroom without being in anyone's way. Perfect. She was supposed to stay for 5 minutes. Then she could go back to the carriage and wait for her family to finish making their impressions. She counted to 300. No one approached her. No one looked at her. She might as well have been part of the wallpaper. At 300 seconds, she should have left. Should have slipped out the side door and disappeared into the night like the ghost her family wanted her to be. Instead, she stayed. She told herself it was curiosity. She'd never seen this world up close, never watched the machinery of high society at work. It was like studying a different species. The way they moved, the way they smiled, the careful choreography of who spoke to whom and when. Fascinating, in an anthropological sort of way. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. She was tired of leaving. Across the ballroom, Vivian was holding court. She'd positioned herself near the center of the room, flanked by 2 other young women who seemed content to orbit her light. Men were already circling, young ones with eager faces, older ones with calculating eyes. Vivian smiled at all of them with the same expression. Interested but not too interested, available but not desperate, valuable enough to make them work for her attention. She was magnificent at this. Always had been. Their mother stood nearby, talking with another matron but keeping Vivian in her peripheral vision, managing the performance, making sure every move was calculated, every conversation strategic. This was what Elara was supposed to want. This was success in their world. The ability to command a room, to be desired, to turn beauty and breeding into power. But watching it now, Elara felt something closer to pity than envy. Vivian looked exhausted beneath the smile. Her hands were tight on her fan. Her laugh was too bright, too practiced. She was performing flawlessly, exactly as she'd been trained to do since she was old enough to understand what her face was worth. And she was miserable. Elara saw it because she'd spent her whole life watching Vivian from the outside. Saw the way her sister's smile never reached her eyes. Saw the slight stiffness in her shoulders when one of the older men said something that made the group laugh. Saw the moment, quick as a breath, when Vivian glanced toward their mother and the mask slipped just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. This was the prize Elara wasn't good enough to win. This was what she'd supposedly lost when the fever left its mark. She should have felt grateful. "You're staring." Elara's attention snapped to her right. A woman stood beside her, older than Elara by maybe a decade, dressed in a deep burgundy gown that was beautiful without being showy. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a simple style that somehow made her look more interesting than any of the elaborately coiffed women in the room. "Sorry," Elara said automatically. "Don't be. I do it all the time." The woman gestured toward the crowd with her wine glass. "It's much more entertaining to watch than to participate. Less exhausting, too." Elara wasn't sure how to respond to that. In her experience, people who talked to her at events like this either didn't know who she was or were being polite out of pity. This woman seemed to be neither. "Lady Catherine Monroe," the woman said, not bothering with a curtsy. "And you're Elara Whitcomb, the one everyone's trying not to look at." The words should have stung. Instead, they were almost a relief. Someone finally saying out loud what everyone else was pretending not to think. "I'm not trying to be invisible," Elara said. "Good. You're failing miserably at it." Catherine took a sip of wine. "Half the room noticed you arrive, and the other half noticed when you didn't leave. You're causing quite the scandal just by standing there." "I'm standing in a corner. How is that scandalous?" "Because you're not supposed to be here at all." Catherine's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Second daughters with scars don't get to attend the Ashford ball. They certainly don't get to stay past the obligatory appearance. And they definitely don't get to stand there looking at Vivian Whitcomb like she's a puzzle they've just figured out. Elara felt heat rise to her face. "I wasn't—" "You were. And you're right, by the way. She's absolutely miserable. Has been for years. But she's very good at pretending otherwise, so most people don't notice." Catherine studied Elara with an expression that felt uncomfortably close to approval. "You're supposed to be in the carriage by now, aren't you?" "Yes." But you're still here. Yes. Why? It was a simple question. It deserved a simple answer. But Elara found herself saying something she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. Because I'm tired of disappearing just to make other people comfortable. Catherine's smile was slow and genuine. Well, that's interesting. Before Elara could ask what she meant, a ripple of attention moved through the crowd like wind across water. Conversations paused, heads turned. Even the musicians seemed to play more quietly, as if they didn't want to miss whatever was about to happen. A man had entered this ballroom. He was tall. That was the first thing Elara noticed. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. He wore black, unrelieved by any decoration or flash of color. His dark hair was cut shorter than was fashionable. And his face looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago and never bothered to relearn. Duke Dorian Hale, Catherine murmured beside her. The most eligible bachelor in 3 kingdoms and the least interested in doing anything about it. Elara watched as the Duke moved through the crowd. People parted for him automatically. A few tried to engage him in conversation. Lord Ashford himself stepped forward with an outstretched hand, but the Duke's responses were brief enough to be polite and cold enough to discourage follow-up. He looked like a man who'd come to a party against his better judgment and was already regretting it. He never attends social events, Catherine continued. Spends all his time at his estate up north, managing his lands and avoiding society. The fact that he's here tonight is unusual. Why did he come? No one knows. Lord Ashford's been trying to get him to attend for years. Half the mothers in this room have daughters they've been trying to throw at him since he inherited the title 5 years ago. But he's never shown the slightest interest in any of them. As if to prove Catherine's point, 2 young women in elaborate gowns attempted to position themselves in the Duke's path. He saw them, adjusted his trajectory slightly, and kept walking. The dismissal was so smooth it almost looked accidental. Almost. And then, just as he passed the center of the ballroom where Vivian stood surrounded by her admirers, his eyes shifted. Not to Vivian, though she was impossible to miss in her midnight blue silk, to Elara. The Duke's gaze landed on her with the precision of a marksman finding a target. For 3 heartbeats, he looked directly at her across the sea of people and noise and desperate social maneuvering. His expression didn't change. He didn't smile or nod or give any indication that he'd even registered what he was seeing, but he'd looked. And in that moment, Elara felt more visible than she had in 6 years. Then the Duke turned away, climbed the steps to the terrace, and disappeared into the night. The party resumed its normal rhythm. Conversations picked back up. The musicians played louder. Within seconds, it was as if the Duke had never been there at all. Well, Catherine said quietly, that was unexpected. Elara's hands were shaking again. She pressed them against the cool glass of the window and tried to remember how to breathe normally. He was just looking around the room. He was looking at you specifically. Trust me, I've been watching Dorian Hale maneuver through social situations for years. He doesn't look at anything unless he means to. You're imagining things. Am I? Catherine's smile was back, knowing and slightly dangerous. Tell me, Elara, how much longer are you planning to stand here being invisible? It was the same question she'd asked herself upstairs, standing in front of the mirror with Vivian's cruelty still hanging in the air. The answer hadn't changed. As long as I want, Elara said. Catherine raised her wine glass in a small salute. Good. Then you should probably know that your sister just noticed you're still here, and she's heading this direction. Based on the look on her face, I'd say you have about 30 seconds before things get interesting. Elara turned. Vivian was indeed moving toward her, cutting through the crowd with the kind of focused determination that meant someone was about to have a very bad evening. Their mother trailed behind her, speaking urgently to a man Elara didn't recognize, probably trying to smooth over whatever social disaster Vivian was about to cause. I should go, Elara said. You absolutely should not. Catherine set her empty wine glass on a passing servant's tray. But if you're going to stay, you might want to stand up a little straighter. Vivian Whitcomb can smell weakness the way sharks smell blood. There was no time to run. Vivian was already there, her perfect face arranged in an expression of concerned sisterly affection that didn't match the fury in her eyes. Elara, she said, her voice pitched to carry just far enough to be overheard by nearby guests. I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you feeling well? You look terribly pale. Translation? You were supposed to be gone. Why are you still here making me look bad? I'm fine, Elara said. Are you sure? Mother said you weren't feeling well earlier. Perhaps you should go lie down in one of the guest rooms. I'd be happy to escort you. I'm fine, Elara repeated, louder this time. A few people nearby turned to look. Vivian's smile tightened at the edges. Elara, don't be stubborn. I'm only concerned about you. She reached for Elara's arm, her grip just slightly too tight to be gentle. Come on, let's get you somewhere quiet. Your sister said she's fine. Catherine's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Perhaps you should respect that. Vivian's attention shifted to Catherine, and for a moment Elara saw her sister recalculate. Lady Catherine Monroe wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. She had her own title, her own fortune, and a reputation for saying exactly what she thought regardless of social consequences. Lady Catherine. Vivian dipped into a curtsy that was perfectly respectful and utterly insincere. How lovely to see you. I didn't realize you knew my sister. I didn't, until tonight. She's been excellent company. How kind of you to say so. Vivian's hand was still on Elara's arm. But I really must insist. Actually, Elara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice, I'd like to stay. The words fell into the conversation like stones into still water. Vivian's expression froze. Their mother, who had just reached them with the unidentified man in tow, stopped mid-step. Elara, her mother said, in the tone that meant we will discuss this later and you will regret it. I'd like to stay, Elara repeated. I'm not tired, I'm not ill, and I haven't done anything wrong by standing here at a party I was invited to attend. Darling, no one said you did anything wrong. Her mother's smile was stretched thin. But you know how crowded these events can be, how overwhelming. We only want you to be comfortable. Translation. You're embarrassing us. Leave before someone important notices, but someone important had already noticed. Elara thought about the Duke's eyes finding her across the crowded ballroom, thought about Catherine standing beside her, casually demolishing the script that said Elara was supposed to shrink and disappear. Thought about the anger that had settled into her bones upstairs and refused to leave. I'm perfectly comfortable, she said. For a long moment, no one spoke. The nearby conversations had gone quiet, not obviously eavesdropping, but not quite pretending they couldn't hear either. Elara could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. This was the moment where she was supposed to back down, apologize. Let Vivian and her mother sweep her out of the ballroom and back into invisibility. Instead, she looked her sister directly in the eye and smiled. It wasn't much of a rebellion, just a girl refusing to leave a party, but in the rigid, brutal world of high society where every gesture carried weight and every appearance mattered, it was the equivalent of throwing down a gauntlet. Vivian saw it. Her perfect mask cracked just slightly, revealing something raw and furious beneath. Fine, she said, dropping Elara's arm like it had burned her. Stay. But don't come crying to me when you make a fool of yourself. She turned and walked back toward the center of the ballroom, her spine rigid with barely contained rage. Their mother followed, but not before giving Elara a look that promised consequences. The unidentified man, who Elara now realized was probably Lord Ashford's son, based on the family resemblance, cleared his throat awkwardly and retreated as well. Catherine let out a low whistle. Well, you just crossed a line you can't uncross. I know, Elara said. Her hands were shaking again. Her heart was pounding. Every instinct she'd developed over the past 6 years was screaming at her to apologize, to run, to make herself small again before the consequences caught up with her. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt dangerously close to pride. She'd stayed. For the first time in 6 years, she'd been given a chance to disappear, and she'd chosen to remain visible instead. It was a small thing. It might even be a stupid thing, but it was her thing. What happens now? She asked. Catherine smiled. Now? Now you dance. What? You just declared war on your sister in front of half the aristocracy. If you slink back into the corner now, you'll prove her right, that you're too weak, too damaged, too less to belong here. Catherine straightened Elara's shawl with brisk efficiency. But if you walk out onto that dance floor and claim your place like you have every right to be here, that's a different story entirely. I don't know how to... You know how to waltz? Technically, yes, but then you know enough. The rest is just confidence. Catherine met Elara's eyes with an expression that was both challenging and oddly gentle. The question is, are you brave enough to follow through on what you just started? Elara looked out at the ballroom, at the glittering crowd that had spent years teaching her she didn't belong, at Vivian, who was already surrounded by admirers again, pretending her sister didn't exist, at her mother, who was speaking with another matron, but kept glancing toward Elara with an expression like she was calculating damage. Every part of her that had learned to survive said no. Don't risk it. Don't expose yourself. Don't give them more ammunition. But the part of her that had looked at her scar in the mirror tonight and decided she was done disappearing said something different. Yes, Elara heard herself say. Yes, I am. Catherine's smile widened. Good. Then here's what you're going to do. She never finished the sentence, because at that exact moment, the Duke walked back into the ballroom, and this time he didn't look away. Dorian Hale moved through the ballroom like he was cutting through enemy territory, efficient, alert, and fundamentally uninterested in anything that didn't serve his immediate purpose, whatever that purpose was. He didn't look at the crowd this time, didn't acknowledge Lord Ashford, who tried again to intercept him near the refreshment table, didn't slow his pace when a young woman in pink silk deliberately stepped into his path and had to stumble backward to avoid a collision. He walked straight toward Elara. Oh, hell, Catherine muttered beside her. I did not see that coming. Elara's throat had gone completely dry. She tried to step back to blend into the wall again, but Catherine's hand shot out and gripped her elbow with surprising strength. Don't you dare, Catherine hissed. Stand still, breathe, and for the love of everything, don't apologize. The Duke stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing than he'd seemed from across the room. Not just tall, but built like someone who'd spent years doing physical labor instead of lounging in drawing rooms. His face was hard angles and old scars, the kind you got from actual fights rather than fashionable duels. His eyes were gray and unnervingly direct. He looked at Elara the way a general might look at a tactical map, assessing, calculating, making decisions she couldn't begin to guess. Miss Whitcomb, he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, rough around the edges like he didn't use it much. Your Grace. Elara managed a curtsy that wasn't completely embarrassing. Her knees only shook a little. Would you dance with me? The question dropped into the space between them like a grenade. Elara heard Catherine inhale sharply, heard the conversations around them stutter and stop, felt the weight of every eye in the ballroom shift in her direction. Across the room, Vivian had gone absolutely still. Elara's voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Why not? It was such a simple question, such an impossible one to answer honestly, because I'm the damaged daughter no one wants to look at, because my sister will make me pay for this later, because everyone's watching and I don't know how to be looked at without flinching. Because I don't dance well, she said instead. Neither do I. The Duke glanced toward the center of the ballroom where couples were already forming up for the next set. But it seems to be expected at events like this, and I've already offended Lord Ashford twice this evening. Once more, and he'll probably challenge me to a duel. There was something in his tone that might have been humor. Might have been. It was hard to tell with a face that gave away nothing. I really don't think, Miss Whitcomb. He cut her off. Not unkindly, but with the absolute certainty of someone who is used to being obeyed. I'm asking you to dance. You can say yes or you can say no, but don't say no because you think you're supposed to. The words hit harder than they should have. Elara stared at him, at this man who'd appeared out of nowhere and was now offering her the exact thing she'd been told her entire life she didn't deserve, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Yes, she heard herself say. The Duke's expression didn't change. He simply offered his arm and waited. Elara took it. His sleeve was fine wool, his arm solid beneath the fabric. He smelled like winter air and something sharp, pine maybe, or cold stone. Catherine made a noise that might have been approval or concern, or possibly both. Don't fall on your face, she whispered as they passed. The walk to the center of the ballroom felt like walking to an execution. Every step was too loud. Every eye was on her. She could feel Vivian's fury like heat against her skin, could see her mother's face go white and then red, could hear the whispers starting up around them like kindling catching fire. That's the scarred one. The sister. What is he thinking? Why would the Duke? The musicians, bless them, didn't pause. The opening strains of a waltz rose up to fill the horrible silence, and then Dorian's hand was at her waist, and she was being pulled into position. Breathe, he said quietly. I am breathing. You're holding your breath and you're about 3 seconds from passing out. His grip tightened slightly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Do it. She did. The ballroom stopped spinning quite so violently. Good. Now follow my lead and try not to think about the fact that 300 people are watching us. That's not helping. No, probably not. He began to move and Elara stumbled, trying to keep up. His hand steadied her immediately. Relax. You're fighting me. I'm trying not to step on your feet. Then you're thinking too hard. Stop counting. Stop worrying. Just move. It should have been terrible advice. It should have made everything worse. But something about the way he said it, with the same certainty he'd used when asking her to dance, made her body obey before her brain could interfere. She stopped thinking, started moving, and somehow, impossibly, they were dancing. It wasn't graceful. Elara still stumbled twice, and once she definitely stepped on his boot hard enough to make him wince. But Dorian adjusted without comment, his movements solid and sure enough to compensate for her mistakes. He led like he did everything else, with absolute confidence and zero tolerance for hesitation. You do realize this is going to cause problems, Elara said after they'd made it through half the floor without incident. For whom? For me. For my family. Probably for you, though I imagine you care less about that. I don't care at all. Why are you doing this? His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker in them, something that might have been recognition or curiosity, or possibly just interest in a puzzle he hadn't figured out yet. Because you were the only person in this entire ballroom who looked real, he said. The honesty of it stole her breath. Before she could respond, the dance swept them into a turn that brought them face to face with Vivian and her partner, Lord Ashford's son, the same man who'd been with their mother earlier. Vivian's smile was poisonous. Your Grace, she said as they passed, how unexpected to see you on the dance floor, and with such an unusual choice of partner. Dorian didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that she'd spoken. He simply guided Elara past with the same focused intensity he'd shown since walking into the ballroom. Vivian's smile sharpened. She leaned in to whisper something to her partner, who glanced at Elara and laughed. The humiliation burned. Elara felt her face heat, felt her steps falter. Dorian's hand tightened at her waist. Ignore her, he said. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one she's been destroying for 6 years. No, but I've been where you are, being looked at like you're less than human because of something you can't control. His jaw tightened. The difference is, I had the power to tell them all to go to hell. You don't. Yet. What makes you think I'll ever have that power? Because you're still standing here. Most people would have run by now. The music was building toward its crescendo. Other couples spun past them in blurs of silk and jewels. Somewhere in the crowd, Elara's mother was probably planning her funeral. Her father was probably calculating how much this would cost the family in social capital. And Elara, dancing in the center of the ballroom with a man she'd never spoken to before tonight, felt more alive than she had in years. My sister's going to make me pay for this, she said. Let her try. The music ended. Dorian stepped back and bowed, a formal, military-precise gesture that belonged to a different era. Elara curtsied in return, her legs shaking. Applause rippled through the crowd, polite, reserved, laced with confusion and speculation. This wasn't how these events were supposed to go. Dukes didn't dance with damaged second daughters. Not in public, not where everyone could see. Dorian offered his arm again. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. They moved toward the terrace doors and the crowd parted automatically. No one tried to stop them. No one spoke. They just watched, and Elara could feel the weight of their judgment like stones on her shoulders. The night air hit her face like cold water. The terrace was lit by lanterns strung along the stone balustrade, and beyond that, the garden stretched out into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear music from the ballroom, muffled and dreamlike. Dorian released her arm and walked to the edge of the terrace. For a long moment he just stood there, looking out at the gardens, his shoulders tense. "I apologize," he said finally. Elara blinked. "For what?" "For putting you in that position without warning. For using you, essentially, to make a point about how ridiculous this entire spectacle is." He turned to face her. "That dance was selfish on my part. I saw someone who looked as trapped as I felt, and I acted without thinking about the consequences you'd face." "You asked. I said yes." "You said yes because saying no would have been worse. Don't pretend otherwise." His expression was harsh in the lamplight. "Your sister will punish you for this. Your family will be furious. And tomorrow, every gossip in the city will be talking about the Duke who danced with the scarred Whitcomb girl. You'll be the subject of every cruel joke for weeks." "I know. And you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Elara looked at him, this strange, brutal man who'd appeared out of nowhere and pulled her into the center of a battlefield she'd been avoiding her entire life. She could lie, could give him some pretty answer about courage or defiance, or not wanting to live in fear anymore. Instead, she told him the truth. "Because I'm tired of being invisible. And for 3 minutes tonight dancing with you, I wasn't." Dorian studied her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. "You're going to have a hell of a time when you go back in there." "I know. Your sister will attack. Your mother will try to remove you. Half the room will be staring, and the other half will be pretending you don't exist." "I know. So what are you going to do about it?" It was the same question Catherine had asked earlier. The same question Elara had been asking herself since she'd looked in the mirror and decided not to disappear. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't have a plan. I don't know how to fight people like Vivian, people who've been training for this their whole lives. She stopped, frustrated. "I'm just tired of running." "Good. Good? Running keeps you alive, but it doesn't win wars." Dorian moved closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You want to survive your sister? Stop trying to avoid her. Stop making yourself small. Start taking up space like you have every right to be here." "That's easy to say when you're a duke." "You think my title protects me? You think people don't talk, don't judge, don't try to use me for their own purposes?" His voice had an edge now, something raw beneath the control. "I spent 3 years on the northern border fighting off raiders while my own family tried to have me declared unfit so they could seize my lands. I came back to find half my estate stripped, my name dragged through every scandal sheet in the country, and a line of vultures waiting to pick over what was left. So no, Miss Whitcomb, my title doesn't protect me. My refusal to give a damn what they think protects me." Elara stared at him. She'd heard rumors about the Duke, everyone had. Stories about the battle-scarred heir who disappeared to the frontier and come back changed. But she'd assumed they were exaggerations, the kind of dramatic tales people told about powerful men to make them seem more interesting. Looking at him now, she realized every story had probably been true, and probably worse than what was told. "I don't know how to not care," she said quietly. "Yes, you do. You proved it tonight." He gestured back toward the ballroom. "You stood there and told your sister no. You danced in front of 300 people who think you're not good enough to be seen. You're out here now when you could have run the moment the music stopped. You know how not to care. You're just afraid of what happens when you commit to it." The words were brutal, accurate. Elara felt them land like punches. "What happens when I commit to it?" she asked. "You become someone they can't ignore. Someone who fights back. Someone who wins." Dorian's expression softened slightly. "But you also become someone who can't go back to being invisible. Once you step into the light, you stay there, no matter how much it burns." The terrace door opened behind them. Elara turned to see her mother striding toward them, her face a mask of controlled fury. Behind her, Vivian lingered in the doorway, watching. "Elara, inside! Now!" Her mother's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "We were just talking, Mother. I don't care what you were doing. You've caused enough of a scene for one evening." Her mother's eyes flicked to Dorian, and her expression shifted into something like calculation. "Your Grace, forgive my daughter. She's not used to events of this scale. I'm sure she didn't mean to monopolize your time." "She didn't monopolize anything," Dorian said flatly. "I asked her to dance. She accepted." Now we're talking, none of which concerns you." The dismissal was so complete, so utterly without room for argument, that Elara's mother actually took a step back. Of course, Your Grace. I simply thought, you thought wrong." He turned to Elara. "Do you want to go back inside?" It was the same kind of question he'd asked before. Simple, direct, with no right answer except the one she chose for herself. Elara looked at her mother's face, at Vivian, still watching from the doorway with an expression that promised retribution, at the warm light spilling out from the ballroom where everyone was probably still talking about the spectacle they'd made. "No," she said. "I'd rather stay out here." Her mother's face went white. "Elara Whitcomb, you will come inside this instant or I will—" "You'll what?" The question came out sharper than Elara intended. "Send me home? I was supposed to leave an hour ago? Lock me in my room? You already do that. Tell me I'm an embarrassment to the family? I've heard that speech 1,000 times. Don't you dare speak to me that way." "Why not? What exactly do I have to lose that you haven't already taken from me?" The silence that followed was the kind that precedes violence. Elara saw her mother's hand twitch, saw the calculation in her eyes, weighing whether striking her daughter in front of a duke would cause more damage than letting this insubordination stand. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Dorian's voice cut through the tension, "I suggest you return to the ballroom. Your elder daughter appears to need your attention." It was phrased as a suggestion. It landed like an order. Elara's mother stood there for another long moment, her face cycling through rage and humiliation, and finally settling on cold fury. "This conversation is not over," she said to Elara. Then she turned and swept back into the ballroom, her spine rigid. Vivian lingered a moment longer. She looked at Elara with an expression that was almost curious, like she was seeing her sister for the first time and didn't quite recognize what she was looking at. "You're going to regret this," Vivian said quietly. "Maybe," Elara replied, "but at least I'll regret something I chose instead of something I let happen to me." Vivian's eyes narrowed. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, sharp and predatory and almost admiring. "All right, if that's how you want to play this." She disappeared into the ballroom, leaving Elara alone with the Duke and the terrible knowledge that she'd just declared war on her own family. "That was stupid," Elara said. "Probably," Dorian agreed. "I just made everything worse." "Definitely. So, why don't I feel worse about it?" "Because you finally told the truth. It's liberating, also terrifying, but mostly liberating." He leaned against the balustrade, his posture relaxed for the first time since she'd met him. "What will they do to you?" Elara thought about it. "Mother will try to isolate me, take away whatever small freedoms I have. Vivian will—" She stopped. "Vivian will destroy me, systematically. She'll make sure every person in our social circle knows I'm damaged, desperate, delusional. She'll turn me into a cautionary tale." "Can she?" "Yes, she's very good at it." "Then you'd better learn to fight back." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do." Dorian pushed off the balustrade. "You stood up to your mother just now. You told your sister the truth. You're still standing here instead of running away to hide. Stop acting like you're helpless." "I'm not helpless. I'm just—" Elara struggled for the word. "Outmatched." Everyone's outmatched when they start a fight. The question is whether you're willing to learn. He studied her for a moment. "I'm leaving tomorrow, going back to my estate in the north. But I'll be in the city again in 3 weeks for the parliamentary session." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because in 3 weeks there will be another ball. Another gathering where your sister will try to prove you're nothing. And if you want to survive that, you're going to need allies." Elara's heart was pounding. "Are you offering to be my ally?" "I'm offering to teach you how not to be a victim. Whether you accept is up to you." It was insane. This whole night was insane. She danced with the Duke, defied her mother, and effectively ended whatever fragile peace had existed between herself and Vivian. And now this man, this strange, brutal, unexpectedly honest man, was offering her something that felt like a lifeline, or possibly a noose. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Dorian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. Because I watched you stand in that ballroom looking like you wanted to disappear, and then I watched you choose not to. That takes more courage than most people have. More than most people will ever need. He met her eyes. And because no one helped me when I needed it, so maybe I can help you. The music from the ballroom swelled and faded. Somewhere in the gardens, night birds were calling. The air smelled like jasmine and coming rain. 3 weeks, Elara said. 3 weeks? And you'll teach me how to fight? I'll teach you how to win. Fighting's the easy part. She should say no, should thank him politely and go back to her life and figure out how to apologize her way back into invisibility. It was the safe choice, the smart choice. But standing on the terrace with the cold air on her face and the memory of that dance still humming in her bones, Elara realized she was done with safe choices. All right, she said, teach me. Dorian nodded once, sharp and decisive. First lesson starts now. When you go back in there, your sister will be waiting. She'll say something designed to make you feel small. How do you respond? I don't know. I usually just, that's not an answer. Think. She attacks. What do you do? Elara's mind raced. Every instinct she had said to retreat, to apologize, to make herself small until the danger passed. But those instincts had been trained into her by years of losing. She forced herself to think differently. I don't respond, she said slowly. I don't defend myself or try to explain. I just keep walking. Like she didn't say anything worth hearing. Good. Why? Because responding gives her power, shows I care what she thinks. Better. And if she escalates, if she makes a scene? I let her. The answer surprised Elara even as she said it. I let her make a scene and show everyone how desperate she is to tear me down. Dorian's smile was brief but genuine. Now you're learning. Remember, people like your sister need you to react. They need you to fight on their terms. The moment you stop playing their game, you've already won half the battle. What's the other half? Making sure they know you're not playing. He gestured towards the ballroom. So go back in there, hold your head up. And when your sister attacks, and she will, show her that you don't care anymore. But I do care. Then lie. Fake it until it's true. That's how everyone survives this world. He paused. Or you can hide out here on the terrace until your family drags you home. Your choice. It was always a choice with him. Always pushing her to decide for herself instead of being pushed by circumstance. Elara took a deep breath, let it out slowly. Then she turned toward the ballroom doors. Wait. Dorian's voice stopped her. One more thing. Do you know why I noticed you tonight? No. Because everyone else in that room was pretending, performing, playing whatever role they thought would get them what they wanted. His eyes were steady on hers. You were the only person who looked like you'd forgotten you were supposed to be acting. That's rare. Don't lose it. Before Elara could respond, he walked past her into the ballroom, leaving her alone on the terrace with her racing heart and the terrible knowledge that she was about to walk back into hell by choice. She counted to 10, then 20. Then she stopped counting and just moved. The ballroom was louder than before. The dancing had shifted into something more energetic, and the crowd had loosened up the way it always did after midnight when the wine started flowing and people stopped caring quite so much about propriety. Elara spotted Vivian immediately. Her sister was holding court near the refreshment table, surrounded by her usual circle of admirers and hangers-on. As if she felt Elara's gaze, Vivian turned and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. There you are, Vivian called out, loud enough to be heard by everyone nearby. We were all so worried. The Duke didn't frighten you too badly, did he? I know he can be rather intense. Several people laughed. Not cruel laughter exactly, but not kind either. The laugh of people who sensed blood in the water and wanted to see what happened next. Elara walked toward them. Every step felt like walking through deep water, but she kept moving. I wasn't frightened, she said when she reached the group. No? How brave of you. Vivian's eyes glittered. Though I suppose when you're not used to male attention, any attention must seem flattering, even pity. Don't respond. Keep walking. Show her it doesn't matter. But Elara's feet had stopped moving, and before she could think about whether it was a good idea, words were coming out of her mouth. Is that what you tell yourself? That every man who doesn't fall at your feet is only offering pity?" The laughter died. Vivian's smile froze. "Excuse me? I'm just curious." Elara kept her voice light, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "Because from where I was standing, the Duke seemed perfectly capable of choosing his own dance partners, and he chose me, not out of pity, not out of obligation, just because he wanted to." "Elara." Vivian's voice had dropped to something dangerous. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I? Or am I just saying something you don't want to hear?" One of Vivian's friends, a girl in yellow silk whose name Elara couldn't remember, giggled nervously. Vivian shot her a look that could have stripped paint. "You think one dance with the Duke means something," Vivian said quietly. "You think it changes who you are, what you are." She stepped closer, and her voice dropped to something only Elara could hear. "But it doesn't. You're still the damaged little sister everyone pities, still the girl who couldn't even keep her own face from being ruined. And one dance won't change that. Not tonight, not ever." The words landed like they always did, precise, calculated to find every weak spot and press until something broke. But this time, Elara didn't break. "You're right," she said. "One dance doesn't change anything. But choosing not to hide anymore? That changes everything." She walked past Vivian before her sister could respond. Walked through the circle of shocked faces and whispers. Walked across the ballroom floor with her head up and her hands steady, and the absolute certainty that she'd just burned every bridge she'd ever built. Behind her, she heard Vivian's voice rise, sharp and furious, and finally losing control. "You'll regret this, Elara. Do you hear me? You'll regret—" But Elara was already gone, pushing through the crowd toward the exit, her heart pounding and her hands shaking and something like triumph burning in her chest. She'd done it. She'd fought back. She'd refused to be small. And tomorrow, when the consequences came crashing down, she'd figure out how to survive those too. Lady Catherine found her near the entrance, pulling on her gloves with shaking hands. "Leaving so soon?" Catherine asked. "Before I lose my nerve. Too late for that. You already lost it about 20 minutes ago when you told the Duke yes." Catherine pressed something into Elara's hand, a card with an address written in elegant script. "Come see me tomorrow, afternoon. We need to talk about what happens next." "What happens next?" "War, probably. Your sister looked ready to commit murder when you walked away from her just now." Catherine's smile was sharp. "But you already knew that. The question is whether you're ready for it." Elara looked at the card, then back at Catherine. "I don't have a choice anymore, do I?" "No, but that's the thing about backing yourself into a corner. Sometimes it's the only way to find out you can fight." The carriage ride home was silent and terrible. Elara's father stared out the window, his face unreadable. Her mother sat rigid in her seat, radiating fury but saying nothing, which was somehow worse than if she'd started screaming. And Vivian sat directly across from Elara, staring at her with an expression that promised suffering. When they finally reached their home, Elara's mother spoke for the first time. "Your room. Now. We'll discuss your behavior in the morning." Elara climbed the stairs in silence. She could feel her family's eyes on her back, her father's disappointment, her mother's rage, Vivian's calculating hatred. But underneath all of that, buried so deep she almost didn't recognize it, was something else. Pride. She'd survived tonight, not by hiding, not by making herself small, but by stepping into the light and refusing to apologize for taking up space. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Her mother's punishment, Vivian's revenge, the whispers and stares and cruel speculation from everyone who'd witnessed her defiance. But tonight, walking into her room and closing the door behind her, Elara allowed herself one moment of pure, defiant satisfaction. She'd danced with a Duke. She'd told her sister the truth, and she'd proven, if only to herself, that she was more than the damaged, invisible thing everyone had decided she had to be. The question now was whether she could hold on to that truth when the world tried to take it away from her. Elara woke to the sound of her door opening, not the polite knock of her maid, but the deliberate click of the lock being turned from the outside. She sat up in bed, her heart already racing, and watched as her mother entered with the kind of controlled precision that meant someone was about to be dismantled. "Get dressed," her mother said. "Something simple. You won't be going anywhere that matters. What's happening? What's happening is that you've forced my hand. Her mother walked to the window and pulled back the curtains, flooding the room with cold morning light. I gave you every opportunity to behave reasonably last night, to apologize, to retreat, to remember your place. Instead, you chose to humiliate this family in front of half the aristocracy. Elara's mouth was dry. I danced with someone who asked me. That's not humiliation. Don't be naive. The Duke used you to make some kind of point about his disdain for society, and you let him because you were desperate for attention. Now the entire city is talking about the Whitcomb girl who thought one dance meant something. Her mother's voice could have cut glass. You've made us all look foolish. That's not what happened. It doesn't matter what happened. It matters what people think happened. And what they think is that you're a desperate, damaged girl who can't tell the difference between pity and interest. She turned from the window. So we're going to fix this. The word fix landed like a threat. How? Your father has arranged for you to visit your aunt in the country, indefinitely. You'll leave this afternoon. The room tilted. You're sending me away? We're removing you from a situation you've proven unable to handle. Consider it a kindness. It's not a kindness. It's exile. Call it whatever you like. The carriage leaves at 3. Her mother moved toward the door, then paused. And Elara? If you try to fight this, I will make sure you never attend another social event again. Not a ball, not a dinner, not even a tea. You'll spend the rest of your life hidden away where you can't cause any more damage. Do you understand? Elara understood perfectly. She'd crossed a line last night, and this was the price. Disappear quietly or be erased completely. Yes, Mother. The door closed. The lock clicked again from the outside. Elara sat in her bed, still wearing yesterday's undergarments, and tried to process what had just happened. Exiled, sent to live with an aunt she'd met exactly twice, a bitter woman who lived in a drafty manor house 3 days' journey from the city and spent her time criticizing everyone who'd ever slighted her. It was a prison sentence disguised as family concern, and it was exactly what Vivian would have wanted. The thought crystallized something in Elara's mind. This wasn't just her mother's decision. This had Vivian's fingerprints all over it. The timing, the precision, the way it would erase Elara from society, right when people were starting to notice she existed. Her sister had spent the night figuring out how to destroy her, and she'd found the perfect weapon. Elara got dressed, not in something simple like her mother had ordered, but in her best day dress, a deep blue wool that had been tailored to actually fit her instead of just hiding her. She did her hair carefully, pinning it back in a style that didn't scream for attention, but didn't apologize for existing either. If she was going to be exiled, she was going to leave looking like someone worth remembering. The house was quiet when she finally emerged from her room around mid-morning. Her father had already left for his club. Her mother was in the drawing room with Vivian, their voices low and conspiratorial. Elara walked past without stopping, grabbed her coat from the hall, and slipped out the front door before anyone could notice. She had Lady Catherine's address, and about 4 hours before the carriage was supposed to take her away. The streets were busy with morning traffic, merchants setting up their stalls, servants running errands, carriages rolling past filled with people who had places to be and purposes that didn't involve being erased. Elara walked quickly, keeping her head down, trying not to think about what she was doing. Running away would make everything worse. But staying meant accepting exile. And something in her chest, that same stubborn flame that had kept her at the ball last night, refused to accept either option. Lady Catherine's townhouse was in the fashionable district, a neat brick building with window boxes that looked like someone actually cared about them. Elara knocked, was admitted by a maid who didn't even blink at her scar, and was shown into a sitting room that felt more like a library than a formal receiving space. Catherine appeared within minutes, still in a dressing gown, her gray-streaked hair loose around her shoulders. "Well," she said, looking Elara up and down, "this is either very brave or very stupid. Which is it?" "I don't know yet." Elara's hands were shaking. She pressed them together. "They're sending me away, to the country, this afternoon." "Of course they are. You made your sister look weak in front of the Duke. She was never going to let that stand." Catherine poured tea from a pot that was already sitting on the table, as if she'd been expecting this. "Sit down before you fall down. You look like you're about to faint." Elara sat. The tea appeared in front of her, hot and sweet. She wrapped her hands around the cup and tried to stop shaking. "I need help," she said. "Obviously. The question is what kind of help you think I can provide." "I don't know. I can't go to the country. I can't disappear. Not now. Not after last night." "Why not? Most people in your situation would consider exile a mercy, a chance to escape the gossip and rebuild somewhere no one knows your story." "Because if I leave now, they win. Vivian wins. My mother wins. Everyone who said I was too damaged, too weak, too less to deserve a place in the world, they all win." Elara set the teacup down hard enough that it rattled. "I'm done letting them win." Catherine's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "All right, but you need to understand what you're asking for. If you stay, if you fight this, you're not just going up against your sister. You're going up against your entire family, their social network, and every expectation that's been built around what girls like you are supposed to do." "I know." "Do you?" "Because there's knowing intellectually that something will be hard, and then there's knowing in your bones that you're about to step into a war you might not survive." Elara thought about the look on Vivian's face last night when she'd walked away, thought about her mother's cold fury this morning, thought about spending the rest of her life hidden in the country, slowly becoming the bitter ghost her aunt had become. "I know," she said again, "and I'm still asking for help." Catherine studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded, sharp and decisive. "Fine, but we need to move fast. You said the carriage leaves at 3? "Yes." "Then we have about 4 hours to stage a miracle." She stood up, already moving toward the desk in the corner. "First thing, you're not going to the country. We're going to make sure of that." "How?" "By giving you somewhere else to go. Somewhere your family can't reach you and can't force you to return." Catherine was writing something, her hand moving quickly across the paper. "I have a friend who runs a boarding house on the other side of the city. Respectable, discreet, and far enough from your family's neighborhood that you won't run into anyone you know. I can't afford... You won't need to. I'll cover it for the first month while we figure out the rest." She sealed the letter and turned back to Elara. "But that's just the logistics. The real question is what happens after, because hiding in a boarding house isn't a life, it's just a different kind of prison. What do you suggest?" "I suggest you do something your family will never expect, something that will prove you're not the helpless, damaged creature they think you are." Catherine's smile was sharp. "I suggest you get a job." The word landed like a slap. Ladies didn't work. Not women from families like Elara's. Working was what poor people did, desperate people. It was social suicide. "Doing what?" "That depends on what you're good at. Can you read?" "Of course I can read." "Write? Do figures?" "Yes, but..." "Then you have skills. More than most people." Catherine sat back down, her expression intense. "There's a publishing house 2 streets from here. Small operation, run by a woman named Margaret Foster who gives exactly 0 damns about social conventions. She's always looking for help with manuscripts, correspondence, bookkeeping. I could get you an interview today." Elara's mind was reeling. "My family will never allow it." "Your family doesn't get to allow or disallow anything once you're not living under their roof. That's the whole point." Catherine leaned forward. "Listen to me. You have 2 choices right now. You can get in that carriage at 3 o'clock and disappear into the country where your sister can forget you exist. Or you can walk out of your house, don't get in the carriage, and build a life on your own terms." "They'll disown me." "Probably. I'll be ruined." "Definitely. I'll have nothing. Except your freedom and your dignity, and the knowledge that you didn't let them erase you." Catherine's eyes were steady. "It's not going to be easy, Elara. You'll be poor. You'll be judged. You'll spend years rebuilding what you should have been given from birth. But you'll be yours. Not your family's damaged daughter. Not your sister's victim. Just you." The enormity of it was suffocating. Leave her family. Leave her home. Leave everything she'd ever known and step into a world she'd been raised to believe was beneath her. But staying meant accepting erasure. And Elara had already decided she was done disappearing. "All right," she heard herself say. "Set up the interview." Catherine's smile was fierce. "Now you're learning." The next 3 hours passed in a blur. Catherine sent messengers, wrote letters, and moved through her network with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years building power outside the traditional channels. By noon, Elara had a room at the boarding house, an interview scheduled for the following morning, and a list of rules about surviving as a woman alone in the city. Don't walk alone after dark. Don't tell anyone your real last name. Use mine if you need one. Don't engage with men who try to get your attention on the street. Do keep your rent paid on time. Do make friends with the other boarders. Do remember that being poor doesn't make you worthless, but pride can still get you killed. Elara listened, trying to absorb information about a world she'd only ever seen from the safety of a carriage window. And most importantly, Catherine finished, don't contact your family. Not your father, not your mother, and especially not your sister. The moment you reach out, they'll use it as leverage to drag you back. What if they come looking for me? They might. Your father probably will once he realizes you're actually gone, but legally, you're over 18. They can't force you to return. They can make your life hell in other ways, but they can't physically drag you home. What ways? Catherine's expression darkened. Cutting off your access to money, spreading rumors that you're mentally unstable, pressuring anyone who helps you to withdraw that help. Your mother is creative when she wants to be, and your sister is vicious. They will come after you, Elara. You need to be ready for that. The fear was there, cold and heavy in Elara's stomach. But underneath it was something else, something that felt like the moment before jumping off a cliff. Terror and exhilaration mixed together until she couldn't tell them apart. I'm ready, she said. No, you're not, but you're going to do it anyway, which is the next best thing. Catherine stood up. Go home. Pack whatever you can carry in one bag. Nothing too valuable or your mother will notice. At 2:30, tell them you're going for a walk. Then you come straight here. I'll have a carriage waiting to take you to the boarding house. What about the carriage at 3? The one that's supposed to take me to the country? Let it wait. Let your family panic. Let them realize that for once in your life, you made a decision they couldn't control. Catherine's smile was cold. And when your mother comes looking for you, because she will, I'll tell her I have no idea where you went. Elara nodded. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing was steady. She felt clear-headed in a way she hadn't in years, like she'd finally stopped fighting against herself and committed to a direction, even if that direction was off a cliff. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've survived 6 months on your own. Catherine walked her to the door. And Elara, when you see the Duke again, and you will, because men like that don't offer help unless they're planning to follow through, don't let him make you feel like you owe him anything. You're doing this for yourself. Remember that. The walk home felt longer than the walk there. Elara's mind was spinning with logistics and fear and the strange, vertiginous freedom of knowing she was about to burn her entire life to the ground. She let herself in through the kitchen entrance, slipped up the back stairs, and made it to her room without encountering anyone. The lock was still turned from the outside, her mother's way of making sure she didn't try anything stupid. Too late for that. Elara pushed her wardrobe aside and retrieved the small traveling bag she'd hidden behind it years ago during a phase when she'd fantasized about running away. She'd never actually believed she'd use it. She packed quickly. 2 changes of clothes, her grandmother's pearls, the book of poetry her father had given her before the fever, and the small amount of money she'd managed to save from birthdays and holidays. It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough. But it would have to be. At 2:15, her maid knocked on the door. Miss, your mother wants to see you before you leave. Tell her I'll be down in a moment. She said, now, miss. Of course she did. Elara hid the bag under her bed and went downstairs. Her mother was in the drawing room with Vivian, both of them dressed for afternoon calls. The picture of normalcy. Elara, her mother said, the carriage will be here in 45 minutes. Have you finished packing? Almost. Good. Your aunt is expecting you tomorrow evening. I've sent word that you'll need supervision. No more wandering off to balls without permission. Her mother's smile was thin. I'm sure a few months in the country will help you remember proper behavior. A few months? Elara's voice was steady. You said indefinitely. Did I? Well, we'll see how you do. If you can prove you've learned your lesson, perhaps you can return for the Christmas season. Her mother exchanged a look with Vivian. Assuming you haven't done any more damage by then. It was a trap. Elara could see it clearly now. They'd send her away temporarily, but that temporary exile would stretch and stretch until everyone forgot she existed. And by the time she was allowed to return, Vivian would be engaged or married or otherwise secured in her position, and Elara would be the forgotten sister who'd been away so long no one quite remembered why she mattered. "I understand," Elara said. "Do you?" Vivian spoke for the first time, her voice honey-sweet. "Because last night you seemed to think you could just do whatever you wanted without consequences. I want to make sure you understand that actions have prices." "I understand perfectly." "Good." Vivian smiled. "Have a lovely time in the country, sister. I'll be sure to write and tell you about all the balls you're missing." The cruelty was casual, practiced. This was who Vivian was when she wasn't performing for strangers. Someone who enjoyed inflicting pain because it proved she had power. Elara looked at her sister and felt something click into place. She'd spent years being afraid of Vivian, being hurt by her, trying to avoid her anger. But standing here now, minutes away from walking out forever, she saw her sister clearly for the first time. Vivian was miserable, trapped in a performance she couldn't escape, fighting desperately to maintain control because control was the only thing that made her feel safe in a world that would discard her the moment she stopped being useful. And Elara pitied her. "Thank you for the well wishes," Elara said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Vivian. I really do." The sincerity in her voice must have been clear because Vivian's expression flickered, confusion, and something that might have been hurt beneath the practiced cruelty. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what I said." Elara turned to her mother. "May I be excused? I'd like to take a walk before I have to leave." "A walk? The carriage will be here soon." "I know, I just need some air. I'll be back in time." Her mother looked suspicious, but Vivian waved a dismissive hand. "Let her go. She can't get in any trouble in 45 minutes. Elara left the room before either of them could change their minds. She climbed the stairs, retrieved her bag, and walked back down as quietly as she could. The front door was unguarded. Why would it be? She was supposed to be a prisoner waiting for her sentence, not someone about to escape. She opened the door and stepped out into the afternoon sunlight. Behind her, she heard Vivian's voice drifting from the drawing room. "She's finally learning her place." Elara closed the door on those words and walked away from her family's house for the last time. Lady Catherine's carriage was waiting 2 streets over, exactly as promised. The driver helped her in without comment, and they rolled away toward a part of the city Elara had never been to. The part where people worked for a living and survival wasn't guaranteed and no one cared about your family name. The boarding house was narrow and old, wedged between a tailor's shop and a building whose purpose Elara couldn't quite determine. Catherine was waiting on the steps. "This is it," she said, gesturing at the door behind her. "Your room's on the 3rd floor. Small, but clean. The other boarders are mostly shop girls and seamstresses. They'll leave you alone if you leave them alone." Elara stared at the building. It was nothing like her family's house, nothing like any place she'd ever lived. It looked temporary and worn and utterly foreign. It looked like freedom. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you survive." Catherine handed her a key. "Interviews tomorrow morning at the publishers. Be on time, be polite, don't mention your family. If Margaret asks why you need the work, tell her the truth, that you're trying to build a life on your own terms." "Will that work? With Margaret?" "Probably. She did the same thing 20 years ago, left her family, built her own business, and told society to go to hell." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "You're going to be scared tonight, tomorrow, for weeks, probably. That's normal. But don't let the fear make you go back. Going back means accepting erasure, and you're better than that." Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. "One more thing." Catherine pulled an envelope from her pocket. "A letter arrived for you this morning. At my house. Must have been dropped off very early." The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, masculine, precise. Elara opened it with shaking hands. "Miss Whitcomb, I'm told your family is attempting to remove you from the city. If this is your choice, I wish you well. If it's not, you should know that my offer of alliance still stands. The parliamentary session begins in 2 weeks, not 3 as I previously stated. If you choose to remain, send word and I'll make sure you're not alone in whatever fight comes next. The choice, as always, is yours." D.H. Elara read it twice. Then a third time. The Duke had found out about her exile, had taken the time to send a letter, had offered help again, even knowing it would complicate his own life. "What does it say?" Catherine asked. "That I have an ally, if I want one." "Do you?" Elara thought about the Duke's eyes across the ballroom, about the way he danced with her like she mattered, about his words on the terrace. "You were the only person who looked real." "Yes," she said, "I do." "Then you'd better write him back before your family realizes you've disappeared." Catherine smiled. "Welcome to your new life, Elara. Try not to get yourself killed in the first week." The room on the third floor was exactly as Catherine had described. Small, clean, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the street. Elara set her bag down and sat on the bed, her hands finally starting to shake again now that there was no one to see. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Left her family, her home, everything she'd ever known. The fear was enormous. But underneath it, buried so deep she had to search for it, was something that felt like hope. She was still sitting there when the knock came at her door. Not Catherine. The knock was too hesitant, too uncertain. Elara opened it to find a girl about her age, thin and tired-looking, with flour dusting her sleeves. "You're the new girl?" "Yes." "Elara." "Mary. I'm in the room next door. Lady Catherine said you might need some help settling in." Yes, thank you." Mary stepped inside, looked around the sparse room, and nodded like she'd seen this before. "First time on your own?" "Yes." "Thought so. You've got that look." Mary sat down on the bed uninvited. "All right, here's what you need to know. Rent's due on the 1st of the month. Mrs. Henshaw, who runs the place, is strict about it. Late once and you're out. Breakfast is at 6 if you want it. Costs extra. Don't leave anything valuable in your room because the locks aren't great. And if any man tries to follow you home, you scream and the rest of us will come running." It was the most practical advice Elara had ever received. It was also terrifying. "Is it really that dangerous?" Mary shrugged. "Not usually, but you're pretty and you talk fancy, so men might try things. Just be smart about it." "I'll try." "Good." Mary stood up. "We're having dinner downstairs at 7 if you want to join. Nothing special, but it's better than eating alone your first night." The kindness was unexpected, unearned, and it made Elara's throat tight. "Thank you," she managed. Mary waved it off. "We look out for each other here. That's how it works." She paused at the door. "Whatever you're running from, family, usually, it'll feel huge for a while, like you made a mistake. But give it time. You'll figure out who you are without them telling you." Then she was gone, leaving Elara alone with her small bag and her terrifying freedom. At 3 o'clock, Elara imagined the carriage arriving at her family's house, imagined the driver waiting, imagined her mother's face when she realized Elara wasn't coming, imagined Vivian's fury when they searched her room and found it empty except for a note that said simply, "I'm not going to the country, don't look for me." By 4 o'clock, her family would be panicking. By 5, they'd be sending servants to search. By 6, they'd realize she was actually gone. And Elara, sitting in a boarding house on the other side of the city, with flour-dusted girls and no idea what she was doing, felt more alive than she had in 6 years. That night, she joined the other boarders for dinner. The food was simple, bread and stew, but everyone ate together at one long table, and people actually talked to her like she was a person instead of a problem to be managed. Mary introduced her around. "This is Elara, new girl. She's fancy, but she's all right." And somehow, impossibly, they believed it. Elara went to bed that night on a mattress that was thinner than she was used to, in a room that was colder than she liked, with the sounds of the city drifting through thin walls. She should have been miserable, should have been regretting every decision that had led her here. Instead, she slept better than she had in years. The interview at the publishing house was at 10 the next morning. Elara dressed carefully in her second-best dress, good enough to look respectable, not so fine that she'd stand out. She braided her hair in a simple style and left the pearls in her bag. Then she walked the 2 streets to the address Catherine had given her. The publishing house was smaller than she'd expected, just a narrow storefront with Foster & Company painted on the window in fading letters. Inside, the smell of ink and paper was overwhelming. A young man was bent over a printing press in the back, and stacks of manuscripts covered every available surface. Can I help you? The voice came from a woman behind the desk, 50-ish, gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, ink stains on her fingers. I'm here about the position, Elara said. Lady Catherine sent me. The woman looked up, and her eyes went straight to Elara's scar. But unlike everyone else, she didn't look away or pretend not to notice. She just looked, nodded once, and went back to the manuscript she was reading. You're early. Good. Sit down. Elara sat. Catherine says you can read, write, and do figures. True? Yes. Why do you need the work? This was the moment Catherine had warned her about, the moment where she could lie and make herself sound more desperate, or tell the truth and risk being rejected. Elara chose truth. Because I left my family and I need to support myself. Margaret Foster looked up again, her expression unreadable. Left or got thrown out? Left. They wanted to send me away. I chose something different. How old are you? 19? And you think you can survive in this city on a shop girl's wages? I don't know, Elara said honestly, but I'm going to try. The silence stretched out. Margaret went back to her manuscript, made some notes in the margin, then finally set it aside. I'll give you a trial, 1 week. You'll help with correspondence, copy editing manuscripts, and general bookkeeping. The pay is £3 a week, just enough to cover your rent and food if you're careful. Hours are 8 to 6, Monday through Saturday. If you're late more than once, you're out. If you can't do the work, you're out. If you bring drama from your fancy family into my shop, you're out. Understood? £3 a week. Elara had spent more than that on gloves last month, but now it was the difference between survival and starvation. Understood. Then you start Monday. Don't be late. Elara stood up, her legs shaky. Thank you. Don't thank me. Prove you can do the work, then thank me. Margaret picked up another manuscript. And Miss, whatever your real name is, if your family comes looking for you, I won't lie for you, but I won't tell them anything either. What you do on your own time is your business. It was the best she could hope for. Elara walked back to the boarding house in a daze. She had a job. She had a room. She had enough money, barely, to survive. She'd actually done it. That evening, she wrote 2 letters. The first was to Catherine, thanking her and letting her know the interview had gone well. The second was to Duke Hale, accepting his offer of alliance and asking when they could meet. She paid a boy on the street to deliver both, then went back upstairs to her small room and tried to figure out how to live a life she'd never been trained for. The answer came 3 days later, when her father showed up at the boarding house. Elara was coming back from purchasing bread when she saw him, standing on the steps with Mrs. Henshaw, his face gray and exhausted. He saw her at the same moment, and his expression cracked. Elara? She should have kept walking, should have gone around the block and waited for him to leave. But something in his voice, something broken and desperate, made her stop. Father. Can we talk, please? Mrs. Henshaw was watching them with interest. Mary had appeared in one of the upper windows. This was about to become a scene. 5 minutes? Elara said. Around the corner. They walked to a small park a block away and sat on a bench that was probably meant for elderly people feeding pigeons. Her father looked older than she'd ever seen him, lines around his eyes, his shoulders slumped. Your mother is beside herself, he said. She's been having the servants search the city for 3 days. I'm not going to the country. I can see that. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Where are you staying? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Does it? Because it didn't seem to matter when you let Mother lock me in my room, or when you agreed to send me away without even asking if it was what I wanted. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Her father flinched. You're right, he said quietly. I should have fought harder for you. Should have pushed back when your mother and sister started treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person. He rubbed his face with both hands. But I didn't. And now you're here, living in a boarding house, working for wages like you're not a Whitcomb. Do you have any idea what that does to our name? I don't care about our name. You should. It's all we have. No. Elara met his eyes. It's all you have. I have this, a room that's mine, a job that I earned, a life that isn't defined by how well I can disappear. Her voice cracked. Do you know what that feels like? To finally exist on my own terms instead of just being the damaged daughter everyone's trying to hide? Her father was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I'm not here to drag you back. Your mother wanted me to, but I told her I wouldn't. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. I'm here to give you this. Elara took it carefully. Inside was more money than she'd expected, enough to cover several months of rent and food. Father, I can't. Yes, you can. Consider it your inheritance, paid early. He stood up, suddenly looking very old. I won't tell your mother where you are. I'll tell her I couldn't find you, but Elara, your sister won't stop looking, and when she finds you, she won't be kind. I know. Do you? He looked at her with something that might have been pride or regret or both. Because Vivian doesn't just want to win, she wants to destroy anyone who challenges her, and you challenged her in front of half of society. Then I'll deal with that when it comes. You're braver than I ever was. He started to walk away, then turned back. The Duke who danced with you, Hale, he came to the house yesterday, asked if you were all right. Elara's heart jumped. What did you tell him? That you were visiting relatives. Your mother insisted. He smiled sadly. But I think he knew I was lying. Men like that always do. Then he was gone, disappearing into the afternoon crowd, and Elara was left holding an envelope full of money and the knowledge that her father had chosen her, just this once, just enough to matter. She walked back to the boarding house and found Mary waiting on the steps. Was that your father? Yes. He give you money to come home? Elara looked at the envelope in her hand. He gave me money to stay away. Mary grinned. Smart man. Come on, dinner's almost ready, and you're buying, since you're suddenly rich. That night, lying in bed in her small room with the sounds of the city humming through the walls, Elara thought about her father's warning, about Vivian, who was somewhere out there planning her next move, about the Duke, who'd asked if she was all right, even though her family had tried to hide her disappearance. And she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt like clarity. She was in the middle of a war now, not the polite drawing room kind of conflict where words were weapons and reputation was currency. A real war, where her survival depended on outthinking people who had more power, more resources, and more experience fighting dirty. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She had Catherine. She had the other boarders. She had a job that gave her purpose. And she had an ally in a Duke who'd seen past her scar to the person underneath. It wasn't much. It probably wasn't enough. But it was hers. 2 days later, a response arrived from Dorian Hale. The message was brief. Parliament opens next week. There will be a reception at Lord Ashford's estate the night before. Smaller than the ball, but still formal. Your sister will be there. If you're ready to face her again, meet me at the north entrance at 8. If not, I understand. But the offer stands. Elara read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. Going to that reception meant stepping back into her old world. Facing Vivian, her mother, everyone who'd witnessed her defiance at the ball. It meant risking everything she'd built in the past week on one night, where anything could happen. But staying away meant accepting that she'd been driven out, that her sister had won. Elara pulled out paper and ink and wrote a single line. I'll be there. She sent it before she could change her mind, then spent the rest of the evening trying not to think about what she'd just committed to. Mary found her sitting on the front steps at sunset, staring at nothing. You look like you're about to do something stupid, Mary said. Probably. Want to talk about it? Elara looked at this girl who'd shown her more kindness in a week than her own family had in years. I have to go to a party, a fancy one, where people who hate me will try to destroy me. So don't go. I can't not go. If I don't show up, I'm letting them win. Mary sat down beside her. Then show up. Wear your best dress. Hold your head up. And remember that you survived leaving your whole life behind. You can survive one party. She bumped Elara's shoulder. Besides, you've got us now. We're not fancy, but we're good in a fight. The image of Mary and the other boarders showing up at a high society reception was so absurd that Elara actually laughed. I'll keep that in mind. That night she pulled out her best dress, the blue one she'd worn when she left her family's house. It would have to do. She didn't have money for anything new, and she wasn't about to ask her father for more help. She'd face Vivian in a dress that was out of fashion, with a scar that marked her as damaged, and a job that made her barely respectable. And somehow, she'd have to survive whatever came next. The week crawled by like a death sentence, counting down. Elara worked at the publishing house during the day, learning how to copy-edit manuscripts that would have been considered scandalous in her mother's drawing room. She ate dinner with the other boarders at night, listening to their stories about difficult customers and cruel employers and small victories that felt enormous when you had nothing. And every evening, she tried on her blue dress and wondered if showing up at Lord Ashford's reception was courage or suicide. "You're going to wear a hole in that fabric," Mary said on Friday night, watching Elara hold the dress up to the lamplight for the 10th time. "It's fine. You're fine. Stop panicking." "I'm not panicking. You've been staring at that dress for 20 minutes. That's panicking." Mary flopped down on Elara's bed, uninvited as always. "What's the worst that can happen?" "My sister could expose me, tell everyone I'm working for wages and living in a boarding house, ruin what's left of my reputation so thoroughly that I can't even get hired as a governess." So I'll starve." "No, you won't. You'll keep working at the publishers. Margaret doesn't care about your reputation. She cares about whether you can spell." Mary picked at a loose thread on the blanket. "Besides, seems to me your reputation was already ruined the moment you left. You've got nothing left to lose." The words should have been depressing. Instead, they felt oddly freeing. "You're right," Elara said slowly. "I really don't." "There you go. So stop worrying about what your sister might do and start thinking about what you're going to do when she tries." What was she going to do? Elara had spent the entire week trying to figure that out. She couldn't outperform Vivian. Her sister had been training for social warfare since birth. She couldn't outspend her. She had exactly 7 pounds to her name. She couldn't even outdress her, not in a gown that was 3 years out of fashion. But maybe that was the point. "I'm going to tell the truth," Elara said. "About what?" "About everything. About leaving, about working, about choosing this life instead of accepting exile." She set the dress down carefully. "Vivian's going to try to humiliate me by exposing what I've become, so I'll expose it first. Take away her weapon before she can use it." Mary grinned. "Now you're thinking like someone who's got nothing to lose." Saturday dragged by in a haze of nervous energy. Margaret gave Elara the afternoon off without being asked, which either meant she was perceptive or the entire boarding house had been gossiping about the fancy party. Probably both. Catherine arrived at 6 with a carriage and a box that turned out to contain jewelry. Nothing as ostentatious as what Vivian would wear, but enough to make Elara look like she belonged at a reception instead of a shop counter. "You don't have to do this," Catherine said, helping Elara with the clasp on a simple necklace. "There's no shame in staying away." "Yes, there is. At least there would be for me." Elara looked at herself in the small mirror Mary had loaned her. The blue dress was still out of fashion. Her hair was still too simple. The scar was still impossible to miss. But she looked like someone who'd made deliberate choices instead of just accepting whatever was handed to her. "I need to do this." "Then do it properly. Head up. Voice steady. And when your sister attacks, because she will, don't defend yourself. Just state facts and let other people draw their own conclusions." Catherine adjusted the necklace slightly. "And stay close to the Duke. Men like that don't offer alliances unless they're prepared to follow through." The carriage ride to Lord Ashford's estate felt shorter than it should have. Elara spent most of it trying to remember how to breathe normally and failing completely. Her hands were shaking. Her stomach was twisted into knots. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to tell the driver to turn around. But she didn't. She just kept breathing and counting the minutes until they arrived. The estate looked different at night, smaller somehow, less imposing. There were fewer carriages than there had been for the ball, fewer people streaming through the entrance. This was meant to be intimate, Catherine had said. Just the key players in the upcoming parliamentary session and their families, which meant everyone who mattered would be watching when Elara walked through those doors. The north entrance was around the side of the building, away from the main flow of guests. Elara found it easily enough, and found Dorian Hale waiting in the shadows, like he'd been there for hours. He looked the same as he had at the ball. Black coat, no decoration, face that gave away nothing, but his eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression shifted. "You came," he said. "You sound surprised." I am. Most people would have chosen safety. He offered his arm. Ready? No, but I'm here anyway. Good enough. He started walking, and Elara fell into step beside him. Your sister arrived an hour ago with your mother. She's been telling everyone who'll listen that you've gone to the country for your health. Creative. Practical. Makes it easier to explain why you disappeared. They reached the main entrance, and Dorian paused just outside the pool of light spilling from the doorway. When you walk in there, she's going to see you. She's going to be furious, and she's going to try to destroy you in front of everyone. I know. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk in with you on my arm. I'm going to introduce you to several very important people as Miss Elara Whitcomb, who I'm considering as a potential consultant for my northern estates. His voice was a matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. And when your sister challenges that, which she will, you're going to explain exactly what you've been doing and why. No apologies, no shame, just facts. Elara stared at him. A consultant? You can read, write, manage figures, and you understand how high society works from the inside. That makes you more qualified than half the idiots I currently employ. He met her eyes. And it gives you legitimacy. A reason to be here that has nothing to do with your family's approval. Why are you doing this? Because I told you I would. And because watching you walk away from your sister at the ball was the most interesting thing I've seen in years. I want to see what you do next. His expression was unreadable. Now, are you ready to walk through that door, or do you need another minute to panic? I've been panicking all week. One more minute won't help. Then let's go. They walked through the entrance together, and Elara felt the exact moment the room noticed. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed, voices dropping, heads turning, attention shifting like a physical thing. She kept her chin up and her hand steady on Dorian's arm, kept walking like she had every right to be here, like she was someone worth noticing instead of someone worth pitying. Lord Ashford intercepted them within seconds, his face arranged in an expression of polite confusion. Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb, isn't it? I wasn't aware you'd returned from the country. I was never in the country, Elara said clearly. That was a misunderstanding. I see. Lord Ashford's eyes flicked to Dorian, seeking guidance. Well, welcome then. I hope you enjoy the evening. He disappeared into the crowd, probably to spread the news that the damaged Whitcomb girl was back and apparently accompanied by the Duke. Within minutes, Elara could feel the gossip spreading like wildfire. Dorian guided her toward a group of older men standing near the fireplace, members of Parliament, from the look of them, already deep in conversation about policy and power. Gentlemen, Dorian said, interrupting without apology, allow me to introduce Miss Elara Whitcomb. She'll be consulting on some administrative matters for my northern properties. The men looked at her with varying degrees of interest and confusion. One of them, a barrel-chested man with gray mutton chops, raised an eyebrow. Consulting? That's unusual for a young lady. Miss Whitcomb has skills I need and sense enough not to bore me with social pleasantries, Dorian replied. That makes her more useful than most of the people in this room. It was possibly the strangest compliment Elara had ever received. And it worked. The men accepted it with nods and thoughtful sounds, as if Dorian had just announced something perfectly reasonable. Well then, Mutton Chops said, extending a hand. Lord Harrison, pleasure to meet you, Miss Whitcomb. Elara shook his hand, her palm sweating inside her glove. The pleasure is mine, Lord Harrison. They fell into conversation about something parliamentary, a bill regarding land rights that Elara only half understood. She nodded at appropriate moments and tried to look like she belonged, all while her heart hammered against her ribs. And then, across the room, she saw Vivienne. Her sister was holding court as always, surrounded by admirers and dressed in a gown that probably cost more than Elara earned in a year. She looked perfect, untouchable, and absolutely furious. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Elara watched her sister's expression cycle through shock, rage, and finally something calculating and cold. Vivienne excused herself from her circle and began moving through the crowd with the focused intensity of a predator who just spotted prey. She's coming, Elara murmured to Dorian. I know. Remember what I said. Facts, not apologies. Vivienne arrived in a swirl of silk and barely contained fury. She smiled at the group of men like they were old friends, but her eyes never left Elara. Your Grace, Lord Harrison, what a surprise to see you all here. Her voice was honey-sweet poison. And Elara, I thought you were visiting Aunt Margaret in the country. When did you get back? I didn't, Elara said steadily. I never went. Oh? Vivian's smile sharpened. Mother was quite sure you'd left last week. Perhaps there was some confusion. No confusion. I chose not to go. The silence that followed was the kind that drew attention. Other conversations nearby began to fade as people sensed drama unfolding. I see. Vivian's voice had gone cold. And where exactly have you been staying? Father seemed quite concerned about your whereabouts. This was it. The moment where Vivian expected her to scramble for excuses or lies, or anything that would give her leverage. The moment where Elara was supposed to break. Instead, she told the truth. I've been staying at a boarding house in the merchant district, working at a publishing house to support myself. The gasps were audible. Lord Harrison's eyebrows shot up. Several people in the surrounding crowd stopped pretending they weren't listening. Working? Vivian's voice was sharp with triumph. You mean to tell me you've been employed? Like a shop girl? Yes. And living in a boarding house? With common people? Yes. Vivian turned to the men, her expression a perfect mask of concerned sisterly worry. Gentlemen, I apologize. My sister has been under a great deal of stress. She's clearly not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, Elara interrupted. Her voice was louder than she intended, and more people turned to look. I left home because my family wanted to exile me to the country indefinitely. I chose to support myself instead. That's not madness, that's survival. Survival? Vivian laughed, high and sharp. You call living in squalor and working for pennies survival? You had a home, a family, everything you needed. What I needed was to stop being treated like a problem to be hidden. Elara's hands were steady now, her voice clear. I needed to exist as a person instead of just being the damaged daughter everyone was ashamed of. So I left. I found work. I built a life. And I'm not apologizing for it. The room had gone completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. You're humiliating yourself, Vivian said quietly. And you're humiliating our family. Mother will be... Your mother, Dorian's voice cut through like a blade, tried to force her daughter into exile rather than accept that she might want something different. That says more about your family than Miss Whitcomb's choices ever could. Vivian's face went white. She opened her mouth to respond, but Lord Harrison spoke first. I must say, Miss Whitcomb, that's rather extraordinary. Not many young ladies would have the fortitude to support themselves. His voice was thoughtful. What sort of work do you do at this publishing house? The question was genuine. Not mocking, not pitying, actually interested. Copy editing, mostly, Elara said. Correspondence, some bookkeeping, whatever needs doing. Can you manage accounts? Review contracts? Yes, sir. Interesting. Harrison glanced at Dorian. You weren't exaggerating about her skills. I never exaggerate, Dorian replied. Vivian made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. This is insane. You're all acting like she's done something admirable instead of destroying her reputation and ours. She turned back to Elara, and her voice dropped to something venomous. You think this makes you strong? You think running away and living like a pauper proves something? All you've proven is that you're exactly what Mother always said, too weak to handle the life you were born into. No, Elara said quietly. I proved I'm strong enough to leave the life that was killing me. That's the difference between us, Vivian. You're surviving by destroying everyone around you. I'm surviving by building something of my own. You have nothing. I have more than I did when I was locked in my room waiting to be exiled. Elara took a step closer to her sister, and her voice was steady. I have work that matters. People who treat me like I'm worth something. And a future that belongs to me instead of being dictated by what you and Mother think I should be. Vivian stared at her like she was looking at a stranger. And maybe she was. Elara barely recognized herself in the words that were coming out of her mouth. This wasn't the quiet, frightened girl who'd learned to stay small. This was someone who'd walked through fire and come out tempered instead of broken. You'll regret this, Vivian said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Maybe, but at least it'll be my regret, not yours. Before Vivian could respond, their mother appeared. She must have been watching from across the room, waiting to see how this played out. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. Elara, outside, now. No. The single word dropped into the space between them like a grenade. Excuse me? No, Elara repeated. I'm not leaving. I'm not following you outside to be lectured about how I've embarrassed the family. And I'm not apologizing for choosing survival over exile. Her mother's eyes went cold. You have humiliated us. Your father is beside himself. Your sister's prospects are being damaged by your behavior. And you stand here acting as if you've done something admirable? I stand here because the Duke invited me, Elara said, as a consultant for his estates. That's admirable enough for Lord Harrison and the other gentlemen here. If it's not admirable enough for you, that's not my concern anymore. A consultant. Her mother's voice dripped with disdain. Do you even hear yourself? You're a 19-year-old girl with delusions of competence. This man, she gestured at Dorian, is humoring you out of pity or amusement, and you're too naive to see it. Actually, Lord Harrison interjected, the Duke has excellent judgment in these matters. If he says Miss Whitcomb is qualified, I'm inclined to believe him. As am I, another man added, someone Elara didn't recognize but who carried himself with authority. Takes courage to walk away from a comfortable life. That's worth something in my book. Elara's mother looked at them like they'd lost their minds. She's working for wages, living in a boarding house. She's thrown away her entire future for what? Pride? Stubbornness? Freedom, Elara said quietly. I threw it away for freedom, and I'd do it again. The admission seemed to break something in her mother's expression. For just a moment, beneath the fury and the control, Elara saw something that looked almost like fear. You're destroying yourself, her mother said. No, I'm building myself. There's a difference. Her mother opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to realize that half the room was listening to their conversation. She drew herself up, spine rigid, and fixed Elara with a look that promised consequences. This isn't over. Yes, Elara said. It is. She turned away from her mother, back to the group of men who were watching with varying degrees of fascination and approval. Dorian's hand found the small of her back, a brief gesture of support. Behind her, she heard her mother say something sharp to Vivian, heard her sister's voice respond, high and furious. But she didn't turn around, didn't engage. She'd said what needed saying, the rest was just noise. Well, Lord Harrison said after a moment, that was certainly dramatic. My apologies, Elara managed. Don't apologize. That took spine, more than most people have. He pulled out a card and handed it to her. I could actually use someone with your skills. I'm putting together a proposal for the Commons, land reform, tenant rights, that sort of thing. Need someone who can manage correspondence and keep the accounts straight. Interested? Elara stared at the card. You're offering me work? I'm offering you a job that pays better than whatever you're making at that publishing house. And it's respectable work. Reform politics, not scandal sheets. His expression was serious. You impressed me tonight, Miss Whitcomb. Not many people walk away from a comfortable life. Fewer still do it without apologizing for the choice. Yes. Thank you. I'd be honored. Good. Come by my office Monday morning. We'll discuss details. He nodded to Dorian. You were right about her, Your Grace. She's got steel in her spine. As Harrison walked away, Elara felt something crack open in her chest. She'd survived. More than that, she'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to matter. Breathe, Dorian said quietly beside her. I am breathing. You're about 3 seconds from passing out. And after that performance, it would be anticlimactic to faint. His voice had the faintest edge of humor. Come on, let's get you some air before you collapse. He guided her toward the terrace, the same terrace where they'd talked after the ball. Elara went gratefully, her legs shaking, her whole body vibrating with adrenaline and terror and something that felt dangerously like triumph. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Elara leaned against the balustrade and tried to process what had just happened. I think I just destroyed my relationship with my entire family, she said. You destroyed a relationship that was already destroying you, Dorian corrected. There's a difference. My mother looked at me like I was a stranger. Good. You're not the girl she tried to bury anymore. She's going to have to adjust to that. Elara laughed, high and slightly hysterical. I just told half of Parliament that I work for wages and live in a boarding house. That's social suicide. Is it? Because Lord Harrison just offered you a job, and 3 other men asked me for your details before we left the room. Dorian leaned against the balustrade beside her. You were supposed to be humiliated tonight. Instead, you walked in, told the truth, and somehow turned disgrace into opportunity. That's not suicide. That's strategy. I didn't plan this. The best strategies usually aren't planned. They're improvised by people who are too busy surviving to worry about optics. Elara turned to look at him. Really look at him. This man who'd appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right offer, who'd stood beside her while she burned her bridges and somehow made it look deliberate. Why did you help me? She asked. The truth this time, not the explanation about finding me interesting or wanting to make a point about society. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. Because I was where you are once. Not exactly the same, but close enough. I came back from the border to find my own family had tried to destroy me while I was gone, had spread rumors stolen from my estate, tried to have me declared unfit so they could take everything. His jaw tightened. And when I finally fought back, when I finally stood up and refused to be erased, no one helped me. Everyone watched and waited to see if I'd survive. Some of them hoped I wouldn't. So you're helping me because no one helped you? I'm helping you because you remind me that not everyone breaks under pressure. Some people come out the other side harder, sharper. He met her eyes. And because watching you tell your mother to go to hell was the most satisfying thing I've seen in years. Elara felt something in her chest shift and settle. Thank you. Don't thank me. You did the hard part. I just stood there and looked intimidating. He pushed away from the balustrade. You should go back inside. Show everyone you're not running. Make it clear that you're staying. What about my mother, my sister? What about them? They can't force you to leave. They can't drag you home. All they can do is talk. And you just proved that you're better at honesty than they are at manipulation. His expression was unreadable. You won tonight, Elara. Don't give that back by hiding. He was right. She knew he was right. But walking back into that room, facing the stares and whispers and whatever her family might try next. What if I can't do this? She asked quietly. What if I walk back in there and fall apart? Then you fall apart, and then you get back up and keep going. That's how surviving works. Dorian's voice was matter of fact. But I don't think you're going to fall apart. I think you're going to walk back in there, accept Harrison's job offer, and prove to everyone watching that you meant every word you said. You have a lot of faith in someone you barely know. I have faith in people who fight back, and you just fought back against your entire family in front of half of Parliament. That counts for something. Elara took a deep breath, let it out slowly. Then she straightened her shoulders and turned toward the door. All right, let's go show them I'm staying. The ballroom felt different when they walked back in. People were still watching, but the quality of their attention had changed. Instead of pity or curiosity, Elara saw something that looked almost like respect, or at least interest. Lady Catherine found her within minutes, appearing out of the crowd with her usual perfect timing. Well, Catherine said, taking in Elara's expression, I see you survived. Barely. That's still surviving. And from what I heard, you did more than just survive. You won. Catherine's smile was fierce. Your mother left 10 minutes ago, dragged your sister with her. They looked furious. Good. Good indeed. Catherine handed her a glass of wine. Lord Harrison's been telling everyone who will listen about his new assistant. You've officially gone from disgrace to curiosity in the space of one conversation. That's impressive. I don't feel impressive. I feel like I'm about to vomit. Also normal, the adrenaline crash is always the worst part. Catherine guided her toward a quieter corner. But you did it, Elara. You walked into the lion's den and came out with your head up and a job offer. That's not nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. Elara spent the rest of the evening in a daze, accepting congratulations from people she didn't know and trying to process what had just happened. Lord Harrison introduced her to several other men who seemed genuinely interested in her work. A few women approached her cautiously, curiosity winning out over propriety. And through it all, Dorian stayed nearby, not hovering, but present. A reminder that she wasn't alone in this. By the time Catherine's carriage took her home, Elara was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She'd fought a battle tonight, maybe even won it. But the war was far from over. Mary was waiting up when Elara got back to the boarding house, sitting on the steps with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "So?" Mary asked. "Did you survive?" "I survived. And? And I think I might have just changed my entire life." Elara sat down beside her, suddenly too tired to make it up the stairs. "I told everyone the truth about leaving, about working, about everything." "What'd they say?" "Some of them thought I was insane, some of them thought I was brave, and one of them offered me a better job." Mary grinned. "Told you that dress was fine." Elara laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. "I think I just declared war on my own family." "Good. They sound terrible." "They are, but they're still my family." "So?" Mary bumped her shoulder. "Just because they're family doesn't mean you have to let them destroy you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away." "I'm starting to figure that out." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the city at night. Somewhere nearby, a dog was barking. Voices drifted from an upper window. Life continuing on, oblivious to the fact that Elara's entire world had just shifted on its axis. "You know what the scary part is?" Elara said finally. "What?" "I'm not scared anymore. I thought I would be. Thought I'd spend tonight terrified and second-guessing everything. But I'm not. I'm just—" She searched for the word. "Free. For the first time in my life, I'm actually free." "Then hold on to that feeling," Mary said, "because people are going to try to take it away from you. That's what they do when they see someone escape a cage they're still locked in. My sister's going to come after me." "Probably. But you survived her tonight. You'll survive her again." Mary stood up, offering her hand to pull Elara up. "Come on. You've got a new job starting Monday. You should celebrate." "How do we celebrate?" "There's half a bottle of terrible wine in my room. We can drink it, and you can tell me about all the fancy people you impressed tonight." It was the best offer Elara had received all evening. That night, lying in her small bed with the sounds of Mary's snoring coming through the thin wall, Elara thought about everything that had happened. About Dorian's steady presence. About Lord Harrison's job offer. About the moment when she'd looked her mother in the eye and said no. She'd survived the worst her family could throw at her, had turned disgrace into opportunity, had proven, if only to herself, that she was more than the damaged, invisible thing they'd tried to make her. It wasn't a complete victory. Vivian was still out there, probably plotting revenge. Her mother would find new ways to punish her, and society would keep judging her for choices that should have been hers to make all along. But for the first time in 6 years, Elara felt like she was fighting back instead of just enduring. Like she was building something instead of just surviving. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Elara dressed carefully in her blue dress, the same one she'd worn to the reception, and walked to Lord Harrison's office with her heart pounding and her hands steady. The office was in a respectable part of town, sandwiched between a solicitor's practice and a physician's residence. A brass plaque beside the door read, "Harrison and Associates Land Reform Advocacy." Elara knocked. The door opened to reveal not Lord Harrison, but a woman in her 40s, severely dressed, with ink stains on her fingers and a skeptical expression. "Miss Whitcomb?" "Yes." "I'm Mrs. Grant. I manage Lord Harrison's correspondence and accounts." She looked Elara up and down, clearly unimpressed. "His lordship says you're here about the assistant position." "Yes, ma'am." "Can you write a business letter without sounding like you're inviting someone to tea?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you add a column of numbers without using your fingers?" "Yes." "Can you work 12-hour days when we're pushing a bill through Parliament and not complain about being tired or hungry or having your delicate sensibilities offended?" Elara thought about the past 2 weeks, about leaving her family, working at the publishing house, facing down her mother and sister in front of half of society. "Yes," she said firmly. "I can do all of that." Mrs. Grant studied her for another long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come in. Let's see if you're telling the truth." The office was chaos, papers everywhere, law books stacked in precarious towers, maps covering one entire wall. Lord Harrison was bent over a desk in the corner, scribbling notes on what looked like a draft proposal. "Ah, Miss Whitcomb. Excellent." He didn't look up from his work. "Mrs. Grant will get you started. We're putting together a comprehensive reform package, tenant protections, fair rent standards, that sort of thing. The landowners hate it, which means we're probably on the right track. Can you start today?" "Today?" "Well, you're here, aren't you? Unless you had other plans." Elara thought about the boarding house, about Mary and the other girls who'd probably expect her back for dinner, about the life she'd built in the spaces between survival and something better. "No other plans," she said. "I can start today." "Wonderful. Mrs. Grant, get her set up with the tenant correspondence. Half of them can barely write, so the letters are a mess. Miss Whitcomb can sort through them and compile the complaints by category." And just like that, Elara had a new job. Not a prestigious one, not one her mother would have approved of, but one that mattered, one that paid, one that was hers. She worked until dark that first day, her fingers cramping from writing, her eyes burning from reading terrible handwriting by lamplight. Mrs. Grant was demanding and exacting, but she was also fair. When Elara did something well, she acknowledged it. When Elara made mistakes, she corrected them without making Elara feel incompetent. It was work, real work, the kind that left her exhausted but satisfied in a way she'd never experienced in her mother's drawing room. When she finally left the office, the streets were already dark and cold. Elara pulled her coat tight and hurried toward the boarding house, her mind still full of tenant complaints and legal arguments and the strange satisfaction of having done something useful. She was halfway home when she noticed the carriage following her. Not obviously, it stayed back far enough to maintain deniability. But it was there, rolling along at walking pace, always keeping her in sight. Elara's heart began to pound. She quickened her pace. The carriage kept up. She turned down a side street, hoping to lose it in the maze of smaller roads. The carriage turned too. This was it. Her mother or Vivian had finally made their move. They'd followed her, found her, and now they were going to… what? Drag her home? Threaten her? Worse? Elara broke into a run. The carriage sped up. She heard the driver call out, heard footsteps behind her. She turned another corner, desperately looking for somewhere safe, somewhere public, and ran directly into Dorian Hale. He caught her by the shoulders, steadying her, his expression sharp. "Easy. You're safe." "There's a carriage. Someone's following me." "I know. It's mine." Elara stared at him. "What?" "I was making sure you got home safely. After tonight, I thought your sister might try something." His hands were still on her shoulders. "I didn't mean to frighten you." The fear drained out of her, leaving her shaky and slightly embarrassed. "You couldn't have just walked with me?" "I was staying back in case your family did show up. Easier to intervene from a distance." He let go of her shoulders. "But clearly, I miscalculated. Sorry." Elara let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "I thought they'd found me. Thought they were going to force me back, or… They won't. Not while you have allies." Dorian gestured to his carriage. "Come on. I'll take you the rest of the way home. And tomorrow we'll arrange for someone to walk with you after dark. Someone less terrifying than a mysterious carriage." Elara let him help her into the carriage, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. They rode in silence for a few moments before she finally found her voice. "You don't have to protect me." "I know." "So why are you?" Dorian was quiet for a moment. "Because you survived tonight. And because people like your sister don't give up after one loss. They come back harder." He met her eyes. "And because I told you I'd be your ally. That means more than just standing beside you at a party. It means making sure you survive what comes next." The carriage pulled up outside the boarding house. Mary was on the steps again, watching the unfamiliar carriage with suspicious eyes. "That your friend?" Dorian asked. "Yes, she's protective." "Good. You need people like that." He opened the door for her. "Lord Harrison's work is legitimate and important, but it's also going to put you in the public eye. Your family will use that against you if they can. Be ready." "I will be." "And Elara?" He waited until she looked at him. "You won tonight. Don't forget that when the doubts come back." She climbed out of the carriage and watched it roll away into the darkness. Then she turned and walked toward Mary, toward the warm light spilling from the boarding house windows, toward the life she'd chosen instead of the one she'd been given. Mary met her halfway up the steps. Who was that? A friend. Fancy friend. The best kind. Elara smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt completely genuine. Come on, I'll tell you about my new job. They went inside together, leaving the cold and the fear and the ghosts of Elara's old life outside in the darkness where they belonged. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of work and survival. Elara spent her days at Lord Harrison's office, sorting through tenant complaints and drafting correspondence that Mrs. Grant would ruthlessly edit until it was perfect. The work was exhausting and relentless, but it was also strangely satisfying. Every letter she wrote, every complaint she categorized, felt like building something that mattered. The nights were harder. She'd return to the boarding house after dark, her fingers cramped from writing and her eyes burning from reading by lamplight, to find Mary waiting with dinner and questions about the fancy world Elara had left behind. The other boarders had stopped treating her like a curiosity and started treating her like one of them, which meant they borrowed her things without asking and complained about her lamp staying lit too late and invited her to their makeshift celebrations when someone got a raise or a better job. It felt more like home than her family's house ever had, but the peace didn't last. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the reception, Elara arrived at Lord Harrison's office to find Mrs. Grant standing in the doorway with an expression that meant trouble. "There's a woman here to see you," Mrs. Grant said. "Says she's your sister. I told her you were busy, but she's refusing to leave." Elara's stomach dropped. "Is Lord Harrison here?" "No, he's at Parliament until this afternoon." Mrs. Grant's eyes were sharp. "Want me to call for the constable?" The offer was tempting, but calling the constable would create exactly the kind of scene Vivian wanted, proof that Elara was unstable, hysterical, unable to handle a simple family visit. "No," Elara said. "I'll talk to her. But stay close?" Mrs. Grant nodded, her hand moving to the heavy brass candlestick on the desk. "Close as shadow." Vivian was waiting in the front room, dressed in a gown that probably cost more than Elara would earn in 6 months. She looked out of place among the law books and reform pamphlets, like a jewel that had been dropped in mud. "Elara," Vivian said, her voice was ice wrapped in courtesy. "How industrious you look." "What do you want, Vivian?" "To talk. Is that so unreasonable?" Vivian moved to the window, her movements precise and controlled. "We are still sisters, after all." "Are we? Because 3 weeks ago you tried to have me exiled to the country. That was Mother's idea. I was simply—" Vivian paused, as if searching for the right word. "Concerned about your well-being." "My well-being?" Elara felt anger rising, hot and clean. "You spent 6 years making sure I knew I was damaged, worthless, less than human. Don't pretend you were concerned about anything except removing competition." "Competition?" Vivian turned from the window, and for a moment her mask slipped. "You think I saw you as competition? You, with your scar and your self-pity and your desperate need to be noticed? Then why did you work so hard to erase me?" The question hung in the air between them. Vivian's expression cycled through anger, contempt, and finally something that looked almost like pain. "Because you were supposed to disappear," Vivian said quietly. "That's how it works. I'm the beautiful one, the successful one, the one who matters. You're the damaged one, the one who stays in the background and makes me look better by comparison. That's the role you were supposed to play. So you could feel superior. So I could survive." The words burst out of Vivian with unexpected force. "Do you have any idea what it's like being me? Being perfect every single moment, because the second you're not, someone's ready to take your place? Do you know what Mother does when I make a mistake? When I'm not charming enough, not beautiful enough, not exactly what every man in the room wants?" Elara stared at her sister. She'd never heard Vivian sound like this, raw and desperate instead of polished and perfect. "She reminds me," Vivian continued, her voice shaking, "that I'm only valuable as long as I'm flawless. That the moment I slip, I become you, damaged, pitied, worthless. So I've spent my entire life being perfect. And then you walked into that ballroom and danced with a duke who never dances with anyone, and suddenly everyone was looking at you instead of me. And I couldn't—" She stopped, her hands clenched. "I couldn't let that happen." So you tried to destroy me. I tried to put things back the way they were supposed to be. You in the background, me in the spotlight, both of us playing our roles. Vivian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But you wouldn't stay in your place. You kept pushing back. And now you're here, working for wages, living with common people, and somehow people respect you for it. They think you're brave. They think you're admirable. And I'm still just the pretty one who's supposed to smile and marry well and disappear into someone else's name. The silence that followed was different from any silence that had ever existed between them. Not hostile exactly, just empty of pretense. I'm not going back, Elara said finally. I know. And I'm not apologizing for choosing this life over the one you and Mother wanted for me. I know that too. Vivian wiped at her eyes carefully, making sure not to smudge anything. That's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? Vivian pulled an envelope from her bag. Because Mother's planning something. I don't know what exactly, but she's been meeting with our solicitor, talking about how to protect the family reputation, how to make sure your choices don't reflect badly on us. What does that mean? It means she's going to try to have you declared mentally unfit, unstable, unable to make decisions for yourself. Vivian held out the envelope. These are the documents she's preparing. Statements from physicians you've never met, testimony from concerned family members, legal arguments about why you need to be placed under guardianship. Elara took the envelope with numb fingers. She can't do that. She can try. And if she succeeds, you'll lose everything, your job, your independence, your freedom to choose. They'll put you in one of those homes for unstable women, and you'll never get out. The words were like ice water. Elara opened the envelope with shaking hands and found exactly what Vivian had described. A carefully constructed legal case for declaring her incompetent. Why are you telling me this? Elara asked. Why warn me? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm tired of performing, of being perfect, of destroying everyone around me just to maintain my place. She met Elara's eyes. And because watching you walk away from everything we were raised to want made me realize that maybe I'm the one in the cage. Not you. Vivian, don't. Vivian held up a hand. Don't forgive me. I don't deserve it. I've been horrible to you for years. I've said things, done things. She stopped, her voice breaking. I've been exactly what Mother made me, and I hate it. But I don't know how to be anything else. Elara looked at her sister, this perfect, brittle woman who'd spent her entire life performing, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. You could walk away too, Elara said. No, I couldn't. I don't have your courage. Vivian straightened her shoulders, the mask sliding back into place. But I can do this. Warn you, give you time to prepare. Maybe that's enough. She moved toward the door, then paused. The Duke, Vivian said. Dorian Hale. He's been asking about you. Specifically, he's been asking Father about Mother's plans. How do you know that? Because Father told me. He thinks the Duke is interested in you, romantically. Vivian's smile was sad. And he's terrified that Mother's legal maneuvering will offend a man we can't afford to offend. So he's trying to talk her out of it. But Mother doesn't listen when she's decided someone's a threat. I'm not a threat to her. Yes, you are. You're proof that there's another way to live. That women don't have to accept the roles they're given. That's the most dangerous thing you could possibly be. Vivian opened the door. Be careful, Elara. Mother fights dirty when she's scared. Then she was gone, leaving Elara alone with the envelope and the terrible knowledge that her fight wasn't over. Mrs. Grant appeared in the doorway. Everything all right? No. Elara held up the envelope. But I know what's coming now. That's something. She spent the rest of the day working mechanically, her mind spinning through scenarios and strategies. By the time Lord Harrison returned from Parliament, she'd made a decision. My lord, she said, standing in his office doorway, I need legal help. My mother is trying to have me declared mentally unfit. Harrison looked up from his papers, his expression sharpening. On what grounds? On the grounds that I left home, took employment, and refused to accept exile to the country. Apparently that constitutes instability. That's absurd. That's also expensive to fight, and I don't have the resources to… Stop. Harrison set down his pen. You work for me now. That means you're under my professional protection. If your mother wants to declare you unfit, she'll have to do it in front of a magistrate. And I'll be there to argue that choosing independence over subjugation is the sanest decision a person can make. You'd do that? Miss Whitcomb, you've spent 3 weeks organizing the most chaotic collection of tenant complaints I've ever seen into a coherent reform proposal. You work 12-hour days without complaint. You've learned more about land law in 3 weeks than most of my clerks learn in 3 years. If that's instability, then I want all my employees to be unstable. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Now tell me everything, and then we're going to bury your mother's case before she can even file it. Over the next hour, Elara laid out everything: the exile attempt, the reception confrontation, Vivian's warning. Harrison listened, made notes, and occasionally asked sharp questions that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Your mother's making a mistake, he said finally. She's assuming that because you're young and female, no one will take you seriously. But you've got me. You've got the Duke, and you've got a growing reputation as someone who does good work. That's not nothing. It's also not enough to fight a legal battle. No, but it's enough to make her think twice about filing. Harrison stood up. I'm going to send a letter to your father, very polite, very formal, just letting him know that if your mother proceeds with this nonsense, I'll be forced to counterfile a suit for harassment and defamation, and I'll make sure every newspaper in the city covers it. You do that? I'd enjoy doing that. Your mother represents everything wrong with how this society treats women, as property to be managed instead of people to be respected. Making an example of her would be satisfying on multiple levels. His smile was sharp. Besides, threatening a Duke's associate is terrible strategy. She should have thought of that before she started this. Elara felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep doing excellent work. That's the best revenge there is. That evening, Elara walked home under the cold evening sky, Harrison's letter in her bag and a strange mixture of fear and hope in her chest. She was halfway to the boarding house when a familiar carriage pulled up beside her. Dorian leaned out the window. Get in. We need to talk. Elara climbed in without argument. The carriage started moving before she'd even closed the door. I heard about your mother's plans, Dorian said without preamble. How? I make it my business to know when powerful people are trying to destroy my allies. His expression was hard. She's making a mistake. But she doesn't know that yet. Harrison's handling it. Harrison's handling the legal side. I'm handling the social side. Dorian pulled out an envelope of his own. This is an invitation to a dinner at my estate. Next week. Very small gathering, just a few members of parliament, some reformers, a couple of influential women who care about women's rights. And you. Why? Because your mother's strategy depends on isolating you, making you seem unstable and alone. But if you're attending dinner parties at a duke's estate, meeting with parliament members, clearly integrated into respectable society, her case falls apart. He handed her the invitation. You don't have to come, but it would help. Elara looked at the heavy cardstock, the formal script. This isn't just about helping me, is it? No. It's also about making a point that women who choose independence aren't unstable. They're brave, and society needs to start recognizing that. You sound like a reformer. I am a reformer. I just don't talk about it much because it annoys people. His expression softened slightly. Will you come? Elara thought about it, about walking into another high society event, about facing judgment and speculation and probably more attempts to undermine her, about risking everything she'd built on one more public performance. Yes, she said. I'll come. Good. And Elara? He waited until she looked at him. Stop thinking of these events as battles you have to survive. Start thinking of them as opportunities to prove you were right all along. The carriage dropped her at the boarding house. Mary was waiting on the steps, as always. Another fancy carriage, Mary observed. You're moving up in the world. Or digging myself in deeper. Hard to tell which. Both, probably. That's usually how it works. Mary stood up, brushing off her skirts. Come on, dinner's getting cold, and you can tell us all about whatever trouble you're planning next. The week passed in a haze of preparation. Elara worked during the day, preparing for Harrison's reform hearings. In the evenings, Catherine appeared with dresses and jewelry and patient instructions on how to navigate Dorian's dinner party without accidentally offending anyone important. The key, Catherine said, pinning Elara's hair into an elegant style, is to be yourself, not the version of yourself your mother wanted you to be. The version you've become, competent, independent, unafraid to tell the truth. That's what people respond to. What if they don't respond well? Then they're not worth impressing. Catherine stepped back to examine her work. You look perfect, which is to say, you look like someone who has better things to do than worry about looking perfect. The dinner was smaller than Elara expected. Just 12 people gathered in an intimate dining room that felt more like a library than a formal entertaining space. The guests were a mix of reformers and politicians, and to Elara's surprise, 3 of them were women. Miss Whitcomb. One of the women approached immediately, older, with iron-gray hair and intelligent eyes. I'm Eleanor Drake. I run a women's employment agency. Lady Catherine tells me you've been doing excellent work for Harrison. I'm trying. More than trying, from what I hear. He says you're the best assistant he's ever had. Eleanor's smile was knowing. How would you feel about speaking at one of our meetings? We have young women who are trying to figure out how to support themselves. Hearing from someone who's actually done it would be valuable. I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak. Why not? You left your family, found employment, and built a life on your own terms. That's more qualification than most speakers have. Before Elara could respond, Dorian appeared at her elbow. Miss Whitcomb, let me introduce you to Lord Pemberton. He's been wanting to talk to you about your tenant reform work. The evening passed in a blur of conversations. Elara talked about tenant rights with Lord Pemberton, discussed employment strategies with Eleanor Drake, and somehow ended up in a debate about property law with 2 members of Parliament who seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. It wasn't until after dinner, when the group had moved to a sitting room for coffee, that Dorian pulled her aside. You're doing well, he said quietly. I'm terrified. That's what doing well feels like when you're not used to it. He glanced around the room. Lord Pemberton wants to introduce you to his wife. She runs a girls' school and is always looking for instructors who can teach practical skills. I'm not a teacher. You're someone who learned to survive in a world that didn't want you. That's the most important lesson you could possibly teach. His expression was serious. You're building something here, Elara. A network, a reputation, a life that your mother can't touch. Keep doing that. And then what? And then you win. Not by destroying her, just by existing in a way that proves she was wrong about you. Later that night, as Catherine's carriage took her home, Elara stared out the window at the dark streets and tried to process everything that had happened. She'd survived another social event, made connections, impressed people who mattered, but the fear was still there, cold and heavy in her stomach, because tomorrow her mother would hear about the dinner, would hear that Elara was being accepted by society, and would escalate her plans accordingly. The attack came 2 days later. Elara was working in Harrison's office when a clerk appeared, his face pale. Miss Whitcomb, there's a constable here. He says... The clerk swallowed hard. He says he has an order to take you into custody. For your own protection. The room tilted. Elara gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. On whose authority? Mrs. Grant demanded. Magistrate Collins. Says Miss Whitcomb's family petitioned for emergency guardianship due to concerns about her mental state. That's absurd, Mrs. Grant said. She's perfectly... I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have to follow the order. The constable appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Miss Whitcomb, if you'll come with me, please. No. Elara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm not going anywhere until I speak with Lord Harrison. Lord Harrison isn't here, miss. And the order says immediately. This was it. Her mother's final move. If Elara went with the constable, she'd be locked away in some institution, declared unfit, stripped of everything she'd built. And by the time Harrison could fight the order, it would be too late. Then I'm refusing the order, Elara said. The constable's face hardened. Miss, I can take you by force if necessary. You can try. Mrs. Grant moved to stand beside Elara, the brass candlestick in her hand. This is Lord Harrison's office. You're not taking anyone without proper documentation and his express permission. I have documentation from a magistrate who was probably paid off by the girl's mother. That's not proper documentation. That's corruption. Mrs. Grant's voice could have cut steel. Now you can leave peacefully, or I can send for Lord Harrison's solicitor and we can discuss this in front of a real court. Your choice. The constable looked between them, clearly calculating whether this was worth the fight. Finally, he stepped back. I'll be back with reinforcements and a proper warrant. You do that. The moment he was gone, Mrs. Grant turned to Elara. You need to leave, now, before he comes back with enough men to actually carry you out. Where do I go? Anywhere your mother can't find you. And then we fight this properly, with lawyers and judges instead of corrupt constables. She was already pulling on her coat. Come on, I'll take you to the Duke's estate. Your mother won't dare send constables there. They left through the back entrance, moving quickly through the narrow streets. Elara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This was worse than she'd imagined. Her mother wasn't just trying to ruin her reputation. She was trying to steal her freedom. Dorian's estate was 20 minutes away by carriage. Mrs. Grant pounded on the door until a servant answered, then pushed past him without waiting for permission. Where's the Duke? His Grace is in his study. Good. Get him. Now. Dorian appeared within minutes, taking in Elara's pale face and Mrs. Grant's fury with a single glance. What happened? Constable showed up with an order to take her into custody. Emergency guardianship. Her mother's trying to have her institutionalized. Dorian's expression went cold. Get Harrison, and my solicitor, and anyone else we need to bury this before sunset. Already done, but she needs somewhere to stay while we fight it. Somewhere her mother can't reach her. She can stay here. Dorian looked at Elara. Your mother can't send constables onto my property without a proper warrant, and getting a proper warrant will take time. Time we'll use to destroy her case. Elara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She's really doing this. She's really trying to take everything. She's trying. She's going to fail. Dorian's voice was absolute certainty. But you need to trust me. Can you do that? Elara thought about everything that had led to this moment, about leaving her family, about building a life, about fighting back every time someone tried to erase her, about allies who'd appeared when she needed them and held firm when things got dangerous. Yes, she said, I trust you. The next few hours were chaos. Harrison arrived with his solicitor, Mrs. Grant appeared with boxes of documentation proving Elara's competence. Catherine showed up with 3 other women who were prepared to testify about Elara's character. And through it all, Dorian orchestrated the defense with military precision, turning his study into a war room. The magistrate who signed the order is known for taking bribes, Harrison's solicitor said, spreading documents across the desk. We can get it overturned, but we need to move fast before he signs anything more permanent. How fast? Dorian asked. We can file a counter-petition today. Get it in front of a different magistrate tomorrow. If we're lucky, we can have the whole thing thrown out by the end of the week. And if we're not lucky? The solicitor's expression darkened. Then Miss Whitcomb spends that week locked in an institution while we fight. And once someone's inside those places, getting them out becomes exponentially harder. Then we'd better be lucky. Dorian turned to Elara. You're staying here until this is resolved. Don't leave the estate. Don't talk to anyone who shows up claiming to be a constable. And for the love of everything, don't open the door to your mother. She won't come here. Yes, she will. This is her last move. If it fails, she loses everything. Her control over you, her reputation, her power. She'll be desperate. And desperate people do reckless things. He was right. Elara could feel it in her bones, the certainty that this was the final battle. Win, and she'd be free. Lose, and she'd spend the rest of her life locked away while her mother told everyone it was for her own good. The counter-petition was filed that afternoon. By evening, half of London's legal and social elite seemed to know about it. And by morning, the scandal sheets were having a field day. Duke defends working girl, one headline read. Whitcomb family civil war, declared another. The stories were a mix of fact and wild speculation, but they all agreed on one thing. This was the most dramatic society scandal in years. Eleanor Drake showed up at the estate with 5 other women, all of them prepared to testify about Elara's competence and character. Lord Pemberton sent a letter stating that he'd personally witnessed Elara's professional abilities. 3 members of Parliament signed a petition supporting her right to self-determination. And through it all, Dorian stood firm, not as her savior, but as her ally, making it clear that anyone who tried to institutionalize Elara Whitcomb would have to go through him first. The hearing was set for Friday morning, 4 days away. Elara spent those days at the estate, working on Harrison's reform proposals during the day and trying not to panic at night. Dorian was often gone, meeting with solicitors and magistrates and anyone else who could help. But when he was there, he made a point of checking on her, not hovering, just reminding her she wasn't alone. "You're quiet," he said on Thursday evening, finding her in the library. "I'm terrified." "Good. That means you understand what's at stake." He sat down across from her. "Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that courtroom. Your mother will be there with her solicitors. They're going to try to paint you as unstable, irrational, incompetent, and you're going to prove them wrong. How? By being exactly who you are. Competent, articulate. Someone who made hard choices and survived them." He leaned forward. "Your mother's case depends on people believing you're a victim who needs protection. Your defense depends on proving you're a person who deserves freedom. So when they ask you questions tomorrow, don't defend yourself. Just tell the truth. What if the truth isn't enough? Then we fight harder and longer, until it is." His expression was fierce. "But it will be enough, because you're not the damaged girl your mother thinks you are. You're the woman who walked away from everything and built something better. That's not instability, that's courage." The hearing room was smaller than Elara expected, just a plain chamber with wooden benches and a single magistrate's desk at the front. Her mother sat on one side with 2 expensive solicitors. Elara sat on the other with Harrison, Dorian, and a small army of character witnesses. The magistrate was an older man named Thornton, known for being fair but strict. He listened to both sides present their arguments, his face giving away nothing. Her mother's solicitor spoke first, painting a picture of a disturbed young woman who'd abandoned her family, taken employment beneath her station, and refused all attempts at help. "The family is concerned, Your Honor. Miss Whitcomb is clearly unwell, leaving a comfortable home to live in squalor, working for wages when she has no need, refusing her mother's guidance and protection. This is not the behavior of a rational person." Then Harrison stood up. "Your Honor, with respect, my colleague seems confused about the definition of rationality. Miss Whitcomb didn't abandon her family. She left when they tried to exile her to the country against her will. She didn't choose squalor, she chose independence. And she didn't refuse help, she refused control." He gestured to Elara. "This young woman has spent the past month working in my office, producing excellent work, demonstrating exceptional competence, and building a life on her own terms. If that's instability, then I want all my employees to be similarly unstable." The magistrate looked at Elara. "Miss Whitcomb, do you have anything you'd like to say?" This was it, the moment where everything would be decided. Elara stood up, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "Your Honor, I'm not unstable. I'm not incompetent. I'm just someone who chose a different life than the one my family wanted for me." She took a breath. "I left home because staying meant accepting exile. I took employment because I needed to support myself. I've built a life that's hard and uncertain and nothing like what I was raised to expect. But it's mine, and I don't need protection from it. I need protection from people who think choosing freedom makes me insane." The silence that followed felt endless. The magistrate looked at her mother, then at the stack of character testimonies, then back at Elara. "I'm going to ask you one question, Miss Whitcomb, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you feel safe living the life you've chosen?" The question was simple. The answer was complicated. "No," Elara said. "I don't always feel safe. I worry about money. I worry about keeping my job. I worry about my family trying to force me back. But I feel safer now than I ever did living under my mother's control. Because this fear is about survival. That fear was about erasure." The magistrate was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at her mother's solicitor. "Do you have any evidence, actual evidence, that Miss Whitcomb is a danger to herself or others?" "Your Honor, the very act of leaving, that's not evidence. That's opinion." Magistrate Thornton shuffled the papers in front of him. "I see testimony from employers praising her work, letters from respectable people vouching for her character, evidence of competent decision-making and self-sufficiency. What I don't see is any proof of instability beyond her refusal to obey her mother's wishes. Your Honor, if we could just... You could just accept that your case has no merit. The magistrate's voice was sharp. Petition denied. Miss Whitcomb is clearly capable of managing her own affairs. This hearing is closed. The words took a moment to land. Then, Elara felt her knees go weak as the reality hit. She'd won. Actually won. Behind her, she heard Eleanor Drake let out a triumphant sound. Catherine was smiling. Harrison looked satisfied. And Dorian was watching her with an expression that might have been pride. Across the room, her mother stood up slowly, her face gray. "This isn't over," she said to Elara. "Yes," Elara replied quietly. "It is." Her mother left without another word, her solicitors trailing behind her, and Elara stood in the empty hearing room, surrounded by people who'd fought for her and tried to process the fact that she was finally, truly free. Outside, the morning sun was bright and cold. The street was full of people going about their normal lives, oblivious to the fact that Elara's entire world had just shifted. "Well," Harrison said, clapping her on the shoulder, "that was satisfying. Now come on, we have work to do. Those reform proposals won't write themselves." Eleanor Drake pulled her aside. "My offer still stands. Come speak at our meeting next week. Tell your story. Help other women see that leaving is possible." Yes, I'll be there." Catherine hugged her, brief and fierce. "You did it. You actually did it." And Dorian, standing slightly apart from the group, met her eyes and nodded once. A gesture that said more than words could. "You won. You survived. Now go live the life you fought for." The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful and occasionally terrifying. Elara continued working for Harrison, helping push through reforms that would actually change people's lives. She spoke at Eleanor's meeting, her voice shaking but her words clear, about what it meant to choose survival over comfort. She watched as other women started making similar choices, leaving bad situations, seeking employment, building lives on their own terms. And slowly, quietly, society started to change its mind about her. The scandal sheets moved on to other stories. The gossip faded. And Elara Whitcomb, once the damaged daughter no one wanted to acknowledge, became something else. A woman who'd chosen independence and survived it. Her father came to see her one afternoon at Harrison's office. He looked older, tired, but also strangely relieved. "Your mother's gone to the country," he said. "Indefinitely. She says the city air disagrees with her, but we both know the truth. She can't face the fact that you won." I didn't want to win against her. I just wanted to live. I know. But in her mind, those were the same thing. He pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. Your inheritance. Properly transferred. All legal. You've earned it." "I don't need... Take it anyway. Not because you need it. Because it's yours." His expression was sad. "I failed you, Elara. For years, I let your mother and sister treat you like you were less than human. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just being a coward. This doesn't fix that. But maybe it helps." Elara took the envelope. "What about Vivian?" "She's changing slowly. She's been spending less time at balls and more time reading. Says she's trying to figure out who she is when she's not performing." He smiled slightly. "You gave her permission to question things, even if she hated you for it at the time." After he left, Elara sat at her desk and tried to process the fact that her family was fracturing in ways that somehow felt like healing. Not for everyone, not easily, but happening. That evening, she walked home through streets that were finally starting to feel familiar. The boarding house was warm and noisy, full of women who'd become more than roommates. They'd become something like family. Mary met her at the door. "Letter came for you. Fancy paper. Duke's seal." Elara opened it in the privacy of her room. The message was brief. "Miss Whitcomb, Parliament has been exhausting, and your absence has made it more tolerable. I find myself hoping you might join me for dinner tomorrow evening. Not a formal event, just dinner. With someone who understands what it costs to choose freedom over comfort. If you're interested, my carriage will be outside Harrison's office at 6. DH." Elara read it 3 times, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. This wasn't an alliance offer. This wasn't political strategy. This was something else entirely. The next evening, she wore her blue dress, the same one she'd worn to leave her family, to face down her mother, to survive the hearing. It was worn now, the hem slightly frayed, the fabric soft from repeated washing. But it felt right. Dorian's carriage was waiting at 6, exactly as promised. The dinner was at his estate, but not in any formal room. Instead, he'd set up a small table in the library, surrounded by books and firelight, and none of the performance that usually characterized high society meals. "This is nice," Elara said. "This is honest." Dorian poured wine for both of them. "I'm tired of performing, tired of strategic alliances and careful conversations. I wanted to have dinner with someone who understands that." "So this isn't about politics?" "No, this is about the fact that I find you fascinating and brave and completely uninterested in the things most people want from me. My title, my money, my influence. You just want to be left alone to do your work. That's refreshing." "Refreshing?" Elara laughed. "That's possibly the strangest compliment I've ever received." "I'm not good at normal compliments. They always sound false." He met her eyes. "But this is true. I've spent 5 years avoiding society because I was tired of people pretending to be something they're not. And then you walked into that ballroom looking like you'd forgotten you were supposed to be acting. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. "I don't know what I'm doing," Elara said, "with any of this. I'm still figuring out how to survive day to day. I don't have time for romance, neither do I. But I have time for honesty, for conversations that matter, for someone who sees me as a person instead of a title." His expression was serious. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking if you'd be interested in spending time with someone who doesn't require you to perform." Elara looked at this man who'd appeared when she needed him, who'd stood beside her through battles, who was offering something that felt like possibility without demanding certainty. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." They talked until late into the night, about his time on the border, about her work with Harrison, about the strange freedom of choosing your own life. And somewhere in those hours, Elara realized that this was what she'd been fighting for. The right to build a life on her own terms, with people who saw her as she actually was, instead of who they needed her to be. 6 months later, Elara stood in front of a room full of women at Eleanor's employment agency, telling her story. Not the edited version, not the version that made her sound heroic or made her family sound villainous. Just the truth about what it had cost to leave and what she'd gained by surviving. "I'm not going to tell you it's easy," she said. "It's not. You'll be poor. You'll be judged. People will tell you you've made a mistake, that you're throwing your life away, that you'll regret choosing independence over security. And some days, you'll believe them." She paused, looking at the faces watching her. Young women, old women, all of them trapped in situations they were trying to escape. But you'll also have something they can never take from you. The knowledge that your life belongs to you. That your choices are yours. That you're more than the role someone else assigned you. Elara's voice strengthened. And that's worth fighting for. Every single day, no matter how hard it gets. The applause was warm and genuine. After the talk, women approached her with questions, with their own stories, with the desperate hope that maybe, possibly, they could survive leaving too. Eleanor found her afterward. "You're good at this. Have you ever considered teaching formally?" "I'm too busy with Harrison's work." "What if you could do both? What if we created a program specifically for women who are trying to support themselves? Practical skills, legal rights, how to navigate employment. You could lead it." The idea was enormous, terrifying, exactly the kind of thing Elara would have said no to a year ago because it felt too ambitious, too visible, too much. "Let me think about it," she said. That evening, she walked home through streets that had stopped feeling dangerous and started feeling like possibility. The boarding house was still cramped and noisy, but Mrs. Henshaw had started letting Elara use the parlor in the evenings to meet with women who needed advice about leaving bad situations. Mary had gotten a promotion at her shop and was talking about maybe, someday, opening her own business. And Elara, the girl who'd once been told she was too damaged to deserve a place in the world, was building something that mattered. Dorian's carriage was waiting outside the boarding house. He'd started doing this, showing up unannounced, not to rescue her, but just to spend time with her, to talk, to exist together without performance or strategy. "Dinner?" he asked when she climbed in. Actually, I have a better idea. There's a new play opening tonight. Mary and some of the other boarders were talking about sneaking into the cheap seats. Want to join us? His expression shifted. Surprise, then something warmer. You want me to sit in the cheap seats with your friends? I want you to do something normal, something that isn't about titles or politics or performing for society. I don't know how to do normal. Neither do I. We can figure it out together. They picked up Mary and 3 other boarders, squeezed into the gallery seats, and watched a mediocre play about star-crossed lovers. It was ridiculous and wonderful and nothing like the formal entertainments Elara had grown up with. And somewhere in the middle of the second act, with Dorian's shoulder pressed against hers and Mary making sarcastic comments about the actors, Elara realized she was happy. Not perfectly happy. Not without fear or uncertainty or the constant awareness that she was still building something fragile, but happy in a way that came from choosing her own life instead of accepting the one she'd been given. A year after leaving her family's house, Elara stood in Lord Harrison's office and looked at the reform bill they'd just finished drafting. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was real progress. Tenant protections, fair rent standards, legal recourse for people who'd never had power before. This is going to Parliament next week, Harrison said, and because of your work, it actually has a chance of passing. Our work. Don't be modest. You did the heavy lifting. I just attached my name to it. He smiled. You know what this means, don't you? You've made yourself indispensable. I can't imagine running this office without you. The words should have felt like victory, and they did. But they also felt like something else, like proof that the girl who'd been told she was worthless had built something valuable. Like evidence that choosing survival over erasure had been the right choice all along. That evening, Vivian appeared at the boarding house. Elara almost didn't recognize her at first. Her sister was dressed simply, her hair pulled back in a practical style. She looked tired, but also strangely lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight for years and had finally set it down. Can we talk? Vivian asked. They walked to the small park where Elara had talked with her father a year ago, sat on the same bench. The evening was cold but clear, the sky turning pink with sunset. I'm leaving, Vivian said without preamble. Mother's house, society, all of it. Where will you go? I don't know yet. That's terrifying and also freeing. Vivian looked at her hands. I've spent my whole life being what other people wanted, being perfect, being desirable, being exactly what would maintain our family's position, and I hated every second of it, but I didn't know how to stop until I watched you walk away. Vivian, let me finish, please. Vivian's voice was shaking. I've been horrible to you, cruel. I tried to destroy you because I was jealous that you had the courage to leave, and I didn't. And I'm sorry. I can't fix what I did, but I can stop doing it, and I can try to build something better. Elara looked at her sister, this woman who'd spent years as her tormentor, and was now sitting here, stripped of performance, offering something that looked like truth. What are you going to do? I'm going to the continent. There's a school there for women who want to study art. I've always wanted to paint, but Mother said it was unladylike. Vivian's smile was sad. It's not much of a plan, but it's mine. Then I hope it works out. Really? Really. And Elara meant it, because she understood now that her sister had been trapped just as thoroughly as she had been, just in a prettier cage. Write to me. Let me know how it goes. I will. Vivian stood up, hesitated, then pulled something from her bag. This is for you. I found it in Mother's things when I was packing. I think she was going to destroy it, but I kept it instead. It was a painting, small, delicate, showing 2 young girls playing in a garden, before the fever, before the scars, when they'd just been sisters who didn't yet know how cruel the world could be. I remember this, Elara said quietly. So do I. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I knew because you'd climb trees even when Mother said it wasn't proper. Vivian's voice cracked. I wish I'd stayed that girl, the one who admired your courage instead of trying to destroy it. You still can. It's not too late. Maybe. Vivian turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. For leaving. For surviving. For becoming someone who doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. She walked away before Elara could respond, disappearing into the evening crowd. and Elara sat on the bench, holding the painting, and felt something inside her finally settle into place. Forgiveness wasn't instant, it wasn't complete, but it was possible. 2 weeks later, Elara stood in the gallery of Parliament, watching Harrison present their reform bill. The debate was fierce, landowners arguing against change, reformers pushing for progress. And through it all, their work held firm, backed by documentation and testimony and months of careful preparation. The bill passed by a narrow margin. Elara felt Dorian's hand find hers in the crowd, a brief squeeze of acknowledgement. They'd done it, changed something, made a difference. That night, there was a celebration at Harrison's office, cramped and chaotic, with reformers and clerks and advocacy workers all crammed into the small space. Eleanor Drake was there, talking about expanding her employment program. Lord Pemberton's wife brought news that their girls' school was adding practical skills training. And through it all, people kept approaching Elara, thanking her, asking her advice, treating her like someone who mattered. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the celebration was winding down, Dorian found her on the office steps. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm trying to remember what it felt like," Elara replied. "A year ago, when I thought I was nothing, when I believed everyone who said I was too damaged to deserve a life. And I can't quite reach it anymore. That girl feels like someone I used to be, someone I left behind when I walked out of my family's house." "Good." Dorian sat down beside her. She deserved to be left behind. She believed lies. You believe truth now. "I believe I'm still figuring it out." "That's the most honest thing anyone ever says." He was quiet for a moment. "There's something I want to ask you, but I need you to know it's a question, not an expectation. You can say no and nothing changes between us." Elara's heart started racing. "All right. I want to build something with you. Not marriage, not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's not what you want. But something. A partnership. Where we both keep doing the work that matters to us, but we do it together. Where we're honest with each other. Where neither of us has to perform." He looked at her directly. "I'm not asking you to give up your independence. I'm asking if you'd be willing to share it." The question was everything Elara had been afraid to want. Partnership without ownership. Connection without control. Someone who saw her as she was and wanted to build something alongside that person instead of trying to remake her into something else. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." His smile was brief but genuine. "Good. Because watching you change the world is the most interesting thing I've ever witnessed, and I'd like to keep witnessing it." They sat on the steps as the city settled into night around them, planning futures that felt possible instead of prescribed. And somewhere in those hours, Elara realized that she'd finally won. Not by defeating her family or proving her worth to society, but by becoming someone who didn't need external validation to know she mattered. The girl who'd been invisible had made herself impossible to ignore. The woman who'd been called damaged had proven she was whole. And the life she'd built from survival and stubbornness and sheer refusal to disappear had become something worth living. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.